Okay, well, let me go ahead and get us started today. I'm Kellye Testy, and I'm serving now as the Executive Director and CEO of the Association of American Law Schools. And so it's my real honor and pleasure today to be able to welcome you to the AALS Institutional Advancement Conference. This is our virtual conference held mid-year, so to speak, outside of the annual meeting. And I just want to let you know how happy I am that you've joined us. Before serving in this role, I was at the Law School Admission Council, but before that, I was the dean of two different law schools. And I mention that because in each of those instances, the advancement operations were very different. I was dean at Seattle University right after it was acquired. And so we really had to build an advancement operation from the ground up. And then when I joined the University of Washington, it was the same town, but very different institution, 120 years old and very big R1 university. It had a very different approach to advancement, a very well-built one that had been operating for a long time and very integrated with the university. So I know firsthand from having served as dean for a total of about 15 years and working very closely with my advancement dean and team, just how vital this role is that you all play in your law schools. And I want to thank you for your effort. What you do couldn't be more important. You're telling the story of the law schools, you're communicating the goals, you're helping the strategy move forward, you're side by side with your dean and leadership, making what the school wants to do possible and building that great pyramid of involvement of alumni and friends and donors. So please know of my great regard for your work. And I think that all deans share just great appreciation for the work you do. This section on institutional advancement is one of our largest. We have over 100 sections. I think this is about the fourth largest section, and it's celebrating a 40th anniversary this year. So it's been around a while and has a lot of good history that we can use to build on and learn from. I want to urge you to stay involved in it. Please, it is what you make it. And so I really want to encourage that. At the annual meeting this year in January that takes place in San Francisco, there'll be more opportunities for the section to hold programming and for you all to network with one another. And I know how vital it is that you have that time to just talk in the hallway and learn from one another like you're going to do today. So I hope you can go. I'm going to be urging deans to go and to support their advancement deans in going. So I look forward to seeing you there. And I hear there's already a lot in the works, including a trip to Sausalito. And that's a beautiful and wonderful place. So in addition to being a great learning opportunity, it should also be a lot of fun. Well, I want to kind of get out of the way and let you at it today for your learning, but I did want to just let you know how much I appreciate you. Every day you're out there doing the work that we really count on to build excellence in legal education. So know of my gratitude and respect and support for all that you're doing. And with that, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Jamie Little at Indiana McKinney and also Heather Rappaport at UNLV for being the great leaders for this program today. And I'm going to turn it to them to hand off and let Jamie take it from here. But have a great session together, and I hope to see you in San Francisco. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Kellye, for kicking us off today the right way. So happy to see so many colleagues from across the nation joining us today. We're going to kick it off with our first session today with Chris Marshall from CMAC, maybe a familiar name to many of you as he hosts a weekly podcast called Alumni. That I know I listen to pretty regularly. It was for some tidbits and wisdom on the profession. He is an expert in this field, many years of experience in alumni relations, engagement, and development work, and now he helps coach others through their growth in the field. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris for our first session today.
Great. Jamie, thank you so much. And Kellye, thank you. And I'll add to the warm welcome to all the folks here on the advancement side at all the law schools out there. We have 161 on right now, and we're excited that you're here. And for those that caught the name of our podcast, it's called Alumless. You can find it on any podcast streaming service. And we did steal it from those of you know of the podcast called Smartless, which is where they have 3 people interviewing a guest that comes on each week. And we have a similar format. There's 2 of us. We bring on a guest each week and we talk about issues in advancement. And we've had 57 episodes and they're all available to listen to. So here's a plug opening up here, but I'm going to share screen and start with some slides. And we're going to talk about integrated advancement is how I call it, the broad name for it. And our agenda for today is going to be in this 1 hour window from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. I know we have people from different parts around the world here, around the country. So we'll go through into it. But the main part of the conversation will be about this integrated advancement. I'll talk about that and give it a high level definition as well. There's a continuum. I see schools spending their time in this area. We'll go through that. I'll give you a couple examples of models out there. We'll talk about this approach to thinking about your alumni population. I have some advice around, anytime you do anything, you ask these 6 questions, and there'll be time at the end for Q&A. But I shared it with the folks as we were getting ready for this. I'm absolutely happy to take questions as we go throughout. So I think there's a Q&A function and a chat function where you can add things to. If you have questions as we go, please feel free to lean in, and one of the panel or moderators will jump in and ask the question on your behalf if you have something at a moment in time where it would make sense to ask it in the context of what we're talking about. So I have no problem with folks saving questions to the end or asking it during. Please jump in. I want this to be interactive if we can make it so. So what we're talking about, this first topic, the main topic here is this. This is what was talked about in the description on this for the session, and it was, how do we look at alumni relations and communications through a development lens? And the summary of this simply is, you've all heard the conversations about, if you're in the advancement space, you've talked to colleagues and you've had conversations with deans, I'm sure, where you ask the question about how do we get the right people in the room from an event context. It's how do we get the right people in the room? From a volunteer context, how do we get the right people to become and serve as our volunteers? And from a communications context, I think it's a little deeper. It goes, how do we make sure we're communicating with the right people in the right manner that they want to be communicated with, about the stuff they care about, the right stuff, from the people that make the most sense to be communicating with them. So it's all of those things. And when I say the right people, I'm talking about with a development lens on the ability for someone to make a gift. Now, you should all know a little bit about me. I'm an alumni relations person, 24-year career in this space. I worked at Lehigh University for 7, at Cornell University for 5, and for the past 12 years, I've been consulting with about 200 different colleges, universities, including law schools, but lots of central programs that connect to a law school, etc. I do this work all the time. So I'm an alumni relations guy, an alumni engagement person. But I firmly believe that we should be thinking about, our industry should be moving towards thinking about, how do we connect so that the outcomes of a good alumni engagement program includes lots of things: recruiting students, helping students while they're enrolled in terms of retention, but also hiring and placing students in career opportunities. And these are all things that you think about in law school. But one of the outcomes of good alumni engagement should be unapologetically good fundraising. And when I talk about the right people in the room, I'm talking about getting people who have capacity and inclination to make gifts to support the mission of your particular school. And that, I understand, in the world of alumni engagement, is a controversial position to take. 20 some odd years ago when I started, if I went to a case conference, for example, and I started throwing around, let's get the right people in the room, they'd probably run me out the door. And now, as we've gone through the last several decades, there's increasingly space in our field to support this notion that that engagement leads to giving and other things. I get it. I'm talking about measurable outcomes for the work that we do, and engagement leading to giving is one of those. And by the way, it's one of the ones that your boards care most about, your deans, your university college presidents think about as well. These are all audiences that care a lot about ROI, or what I call ROE. So when I think about it, I'm talking about looking through the lens. I'm not suggesting also, these are all foundational opening comments here, I'm also not suggesting that we keep the development lens on 100% of the time and don't ever do broad-based work. What I'm talking about is a focus on smaller audiences with depth of engagement with those populations. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of models and how I see this working at other institutions and where other schools are on this work. So if I was in a room with all of you and I could ask you to raise your hands, I would ask, how many of you have, if I literally were sitting in a room with 200 people and I said, okay, raise your hands if you, over half of your job is alumni engagement. There'd be a good chunk of you to put up your hands. If I said, how many of you are, most of your job or over half of your job is fundraising? Same, I think we get the same. And then communications will get the same. But what I often find when you look at law school advancement professionals is that they fall into this last category, where they do alumni engagement, fundraising, stewardship, communications, advancement services, events, special projects, random assignments, and other duties as assigned. That's usually the shops I've seen, the typical law school. There's some that have more specializing that goes on, which is great, but usually you're in a role that you have multiple things that you're dealing with and juggling within your own remit. Your own position description has many of these same things going on in it. And this notion of thinking about our alumni through the development lens is something that I'm not the first person to talk about, and I'm not it hasn't been all that recent either. I'm going to show you this one quote right here. Comes from a colleague, a friend of mine, a guy named Andy Shanlin, who works in the alumni engagement space as well. He's a consultant for Huron GG&A. And he wrote this quote. I'm going to show you the date when he wrote it, but what he said was the most obvious place for alumni relations and development to combine efforts is annual giving. Alumni officers, annual giving staff are talking to the same audience as students, often their parents and alumni, of course. In a law school context, less their parents, more the students and their alumni. He went on to say, fundraising is dead. And I actually agree with this. Alumni relations development are, I believe, to be more interwoven, and that's a good thing for our donors and our institution. There are still places out there, if you're an alumni professional and you're running an alumni shop, whether in the center or in any of the schools or in a law school, there are people out there who will say, my job is to be the fundraiser. Those people over there, they do the fundraising. Usually at a law school, there's a collaboration between the two. In some other larger university settings, I see that reference between the fundraisers and the fundraisers to be a difficult relationship where they will describe themselves as the good guys. We're the fundraiser. Those are the bad guys, or that's the dark side. You go over to fundraising over there, and those are the people that ask for money. We don't do that dirty work. That has blurred over the years, and I say it's almost gone away right here. And in case of Andy, he made this statement. I shared this with an audience not long ago, and I said this statement was not that recent. This statement was made back in 2008. 16 years ago, he was already saying that this was dead, and our industry has shifted to a point where there's blurred lines and integrated advancement models exist at most places. In fact, I would say that probably most of you on this call, there's 192 people joining us now, most of you on this webinar are probably in a pretty integrated advancement model, given a lot of those roles are combined, or you're collaborating very closely with the folks on the fundraising side. If you're on the alumni engagement side, or if you're a communicator, you're talking and collaborating with the fundraising side as well. So, and one of the reasons why for this is that the data is showing pretty compelling. This is correlational data I'm about to show you. The correlation between giving and, so the case, you all know the case has 4 categories. There's philanthropy that we measure, of course, around what percentage of alums are giving. But there are other 3 categories: who's going to events, who's volunteering, and then the 4th one is communications. So hold on for a second. If you're a communicator, hang on for 1 second. I'm going to show you a slide that came from CASE last year. But this is an average of a group of public institutions looking at 4 years of giving history on 3 of those. Really, it's the donor one, but also the other 2, experiential and volunteer. So what this slide is telling us, that if on the 4 bars on the far left-hand side, of that population of schools, their average giving dropped over those course of those 4 fiscal years from 10 down to 7.4%, which is around the national average. Is in the, I've seen it low down to 1 or 2%. I've seen it as high. The average is around 6 or 7%. They go up even higher. Of course, I'm sure there are people on this call who have examples that are in the double or way up into the 20 or 30% range. Those are rare. You're seeing these numbers typically right here, where you see here, 10 to 7% is where we typically will see it. And the second set of bars, obviously, are the people that have attended events over the course of those same fiscal years. So the correlational data is telling us here that it's 3 or 4 times more likely that a person who attends an event is going to be a donor. So to me, this is pretty compelling data. That part's interesting. When you go to the next one over, the set of where it says V plus D, the volunteers plus donors, these are people who are volunteers. So you go now 10 or plus % more more likelihood to be a donor if you're a volunteer. And what's even more interesting to me is not only are these percentages compelling data points right here, but when you look at the average gift, same exact population, same set of schools here, same 4 fiscal years, their average gift was hovering just above $1,000 for all 4 of those years. If you attended an event, it was going to be about twice that amount. Again, correlational, not causation here. You're talking about correlating data points here. But when you go into the volunteer side, you see it jump up even more. I was just on a call with the University of Denver, and they were showing some of their same exact data, and they show that they actually went into the volunteer side and said, if you're a one-time volunteer and do a short stint volunteer activity, a micro volunteer or a short-term one, done in a day type of volunteer activity, you're going to show some higher levels of percentage and dollar gifts. But the deeper you go into your volunteer engagement, you're on a board, you're on a council, you're on the law school board, whatever it might be. So the further you go down the continuum and depth of volunteer engagement, the even higher percentages and higher dollar amounts compared to the average overall. So we're talking now about breadth versus depth here. In this case, the deeper you can get somebody to volunteer, the more likely to be a donor at a higher level is what we're talking about with this data. And this is the case data I was referring to. This shows now all 3 of the other case. So this is comparing all the case categories to the other 3 to donor behavior. So you see the first set of bars here are volunteer activity. The second set is experiential and communications. And what you're seeing here is the likelihood of somebody being a donor if they're a volunteer or if they're going to an event or experiencing something. It could be online as well, and if they're involved in some meaningful communications. So what's interesting here is that it's pretty compelling data when you look at the blue and teal bars, but when you look at these 3 orange bars, this is professional schools. The problem with this data is that we only have 2 schools participating. So this is partly another plug here, another plea. If you're able to report to the case metrics on engagement through your law school and get your data in here, this data will improve, and I think we'll see some more. Being 2, I would say this data is probably not even all that relevant. I think when you look at the teal, the 147 schools on the far right, that teal bar in each of the categories here, those are undergrad and postgraduate combination schools. You'll see that again, that volunteer, experiential, and communications all show giving rates at a higher level. So this is sort of the industry of how it's measuring it now, how we're correlating behavioral data. There's lots of other things that are going to be done in our industry as we are better at measuring. We're going to start to see some causational things come forward, and even some predictive modeling work come down the road. So my plea to all of the folks on this call, if you're able to and have the resources to do so, please submit your data so we can get this group of the N higher, frankly, so that we can get more data and be able to look at these across a bunch of law schools instead of just the 2 that I'm not even sure if these are what other schools these are, but we need more law schools in this data set. So this is a slide I use. I call it the continuum slide. I'll make a caveat here. I've worked with 200 clients, 20 law schools, 180 broader university type central kind of programs. So what I'm going to show you here has a little focus on the center program, because that's where I spent most of my time. But what I want you to think about is where your program is as a law school advancement operation on this continuum. And what this is looking at this integrated advancement model. How alumni engagement is organized in most central shops across the country is on this continuum. On the far left-hand side, you have a central Stanford alumni program that is less about fundraising and more about a holistic alumni philosophy. We're all alumni in its breadth, and they do very sophisticated things. They have a very large staff, and it's one of the top programs in the country, frankly. But they would say is that we would still do alumni engagement whether or not we were ever raising money again. That's the far left of this continuum. On the far right, you have the University of Miami central program now that thinks about it more about fundraising, and that the work we do, if it doesn't lead to some clear movement towards a fundraising outcome, we're probably not going to do it. That's probably a little too extreme, but it's the closest I can get to it in short form here to get you an understanding that there's two sides to this. And I would argue that most schools are closer to the right, and I would argue our industry has been moving from left to right on this chart over time. And what you see underneath are these logos of other schools that are in varying places along this continuum right here. So if you're at the University of Michigan and you're in the Central Alumni Association, you're still out on that left-hand side where you're more focused on engagement and less worried about the fundraising implications. You do, it's not a zero, I'm saying, it's just not as high on the radar as Miami, or as you go further to the right here. And again, you work your way from left to right over, you'll see various school logos: Denver, Wisconsin, Indiana, University of Central Florida, Boise State, University of Miami. All of them are in some continuum. What you see on them mostly on the right-hand side, kind of from about a quarter of the way in and all the way to the far right, you'll see there's that little box that says reports to a vice president or a vice chancellor of advancement or a foundation CEO. The vast majority, if you have 2,000 universities out there across the country, 1,900 of them are going to be in that box. There's very few that are off to the left over here. The vast majority of them, the alumni position, the communications positions report into an advancement structure, sometimes to a larger, through a university vice president for communications. In a law school context, most of the time reports through a director of development or an associate dean, where they oversee all advancement functions around alumni engagement, fundraising, and communication. So they fall into an advancement structure. So there's a parallel between a law program and a centralized program here, where you see these other relationships here. So within that, you find that there are intertwined foundations and alumni associations. You have a lot of shops where alumni, there's a person who oversees alumni and annual giving as a role. At Denver, they have a person who oversees alumni and career services in their central shop, and so on. There's lots of things. So the B logo is Boise State. They actually have a really interesting model where they have the same associate vice president. Think of it like a associate dean in a law school. Same associate vice president there oversees alumni engagement, annual giving, donor relations stewardship, and communications for Boise State. And that's the model they have in a much more integrated fashion than you'll see at the schools that are on the left-hand side of this continuum. I want to pause just for a second. Jamie, I'm going to check with you or whoever is monitoring questions in chat. Has there anything come up so far that I can jump in on and respond to, or are we doing good?
Nothing as of yet.
Okay. Wowed them into silence, Jamie. All right. I'm going to keep moving. So that's the continuum. A couple of models of how this might look at other institutions. I want to show you two here. These are larger public institutions. Again, this is the central model at each of these places. The professional schools will often, well, not always, but there are times where they mirror this model or they have their own approach to it. But here's the Ohio State University. And the way they think about a contemporary engagement program is this visual. And what they have on the far left-hand side, out in the pasture there, are a group of alumni who are unaware. So if you're in a law school, you're obviously not going to have the kind of, at Ohio State, we're talking about 600,000 alumni. And probably half of them are out there in the pasture in the unaware category. And what they've built is a staffing structure that aligns with these stages that you're seeing here. So unaware to aware, they have people who are trying to move people from that unaware to aware, and so on. How do we get them more into that learning phase, participating phase, ultimately investing and advocating for us? And their little Buckeye tree there is showing the various things they can be participating in and learning about or investing in or advocating for. So that you see all these different, all in a law school context, you'd have different things there, but some of them would be the same, but different pieces there. But the point here is that there's a journey that your alums are taking, and many of them will fall out in that pasture in the distance and slowly move their way up the path. In some cases, they'll never move. They've come, they got their degree, and they're done. And they don't want to engage. And they're not going to ever be on the right-hand side of this tree. But the goal is to move people forward along this way. And the lens that I'm talking about early on about the development lens is where should we spend our time trying to move these people to the right side of this tree in this model? It should be on those people who have that capacity, in my opinion, when we put on that development lens. So this is the journey that Ohio State builds. A very similar model here at University of Colorado, Boulder. They have their buffalo climbing the mountain here. Given where they are, this analogy made sense, I think. And they have very similar stages. Out in the patch there, number one. These are the silent. We don't know where they are. They have some, do not contact code on their database. They're out there and unaware, and we're unaware of them. Number two is this aware group. They've participated in some or any one of those four, case engagement categories. Again, they're philanthropy, experiential, volunteer, and communication. So if you hit one of those markers for them, you're in that number two category. Number three for them is that you're doing some communication and or philanthropy. So you're now becoming a little bit more active. You're showing signs that you have interest in what's going on at, in this case, Colorado Boulder. And they're getting number four, they're starting to get to the base of the mountain. They're active and that they're going to an event and probably making an annual gift. And the journey up the mountain in nesting is that it participates in volunteerism and or philanthropy, and at the very top, someone that participates in all four case categories. If you have, I'll give you an example of a larger public institution. They have 200,000 alumni. They had less than 1,000 people in that number six category. So if you have an alumni population of 20,000 at your law school, and I know there's ranges of what size what size your alumni populations are, but if you have a 20,000 population, you're talking about 100 people who are going to hit all four case categories. So it's very small population of people. And what we're going to talk about a little bit in this ABCD approach, I'm going to walk you through this here in a moment, is how do we get the right people to head down that path so that when they get to the top of the mountain, we have the right people there. Again, right people being with that development lens on is saying these people have the capacity to make a significant gift to our institutions. All right, so the ABCD approach, I'm going to show you a model that we built. I was at Cornell University for 5 years, and we built this model around our sesquicentennial. And really the charge I was given by the vice president is how do we implement a segmented and targeted engagement strategy over 4 years to build a sustainable advancement program as we head into Cornell's sesquicentennial. This was around 2010, 11, and their sesquicentennial was going to be in 2015. So this was the charge I was given, and we were said, the approach was how do we get, basically, we're going to still do broad-based engagement. We want to make sure the depth of our engagement is going to be focused on getting those right people in the room. And here's how the population broke out. So we had 224,000 alumni across the institution. This includes a law school. There were, I forget the exact law school number in that, but they were in this total number. And what we were talking about here is when we looked at an engaged group of a population of people that were going to do, climb that mountain in the Colorado version or be under the tree in the Ohio State model. In the Cornell, we didn't have a visual like that, but basically what we looked at was the 224,000 people and said there's going to be 3,000 people who are going to be at this top level. Roughly speaking, these are principal, maybe high-level major gift and principal gift donors in our world, about 1% of the population, 3,000 people. And these are rough numbers. I rounded, of course, for the purpose of the presentation. Major gift donors, maybe some high-level leadership annual gifts were in here as well, but roughly 8,000 people that major gift, about 4%. When we looked at the broader annual fund, we actually had a participation rate of around 25 to 30%. So 60,000 of our alums were doing something and supporting the institution at that annual fund level. We thought of them as a C level. I added another level in here as we were going along. I realized that there was a group of people who were, I call them D pluses, who were going to events and they were volunteering. We weren't yet measuring communications back in 2015. This was before 2011. This was before the case had the four categories. We would have added communications in here and it would have been a bigger number. But non-donors who were, in our case here, volunteering and attending events, we found another about 7,000 people there, about 3%. And then and the unengaged group was this other, almost 2/3 of the population. 146,000 people was everybody else. And if you look at this on a visual from an not org chart, but from a pie chart here is what you're going to see here in a second. what you'll find is that you have 2/3 of the alumni who, in a traditional alumni program or communications effort, you're going to try to talk to everybody in this pie the same way and engage them the same way. And what we quickly learned was there's 2/3 of the people who we need to keep communicating with in probably the way we're currently doing it. But there's other people who are in this other third, the smaller pieces of the pie, who we need to talk to differently, communicate with differently, invite to events, involve in volunteer roles, etc., in a different way. And this allowed us to focus our efforts on a population. Instead of worrying about 224,000 people, we were worried about, whatever, I forgot my numbers here, are 75,000 people roughly. So it allowed for more focus. There's a school we're working with right now who have a population of 360,000 alumni. And the VP said, I have nowhere near the resources to and try to engage, communicate with, or raise money from, or get them to volunteer from 360,000 people. And they took this approach and applied it across their population and found that they have 300,000 people who were their Ds. And what he said was, this is a vice president for advancement in a central program. He said, I do have the resources to try to engage and focus on those 60,000 people. So again, it's a disciplined approach on getting the right people in the room, the right people to volunteer, the right people that we're communicating with in the right way.
We do have a question.
Go ahead, Heather. Yeah.
No, yeah, sorry. I don't want to interrupt the great flow
Please.
here. But one comment and then one question. So I think this is from a communicator. I would love to see that bar chart from the beginning with communications metrics added. So something like email opens, clicks, abandonment, people who are purchasing something but abandon their cart. So that's the first comment. And then the second is a question. Do you think that there are benefits to educating your staff and faculty about what your advancement model looks like at your institution? Do you think this would help leverage engagement opportunities and create a culture of philanthropy within the school? Yeah.
So let me hit the first one real quick, and I'll come back to that. The first comment, and I'll come back to the question. So I agree. We need more communications data. Not just this is the case chart, but my charts didn't have any communication. These were done and started a long time before we were collecting that data. So I had like 10 years of data on that. But for case to get more robust data around the communication points you were talking about, we need more people to participate in this process. So yes, and the communicators of the world, they have very detailed click-through rates, open rates, abandonment, all those things that you just talked about. Are going to be important that we measure, and they will correlate. What we're finding nationally, there's been some studies on this, is that roughly speaking, it falls into the same category as events. Is that you're twice as likely to be a donor at twice the level if you're communicating in some meaningful way with alma mater. So those are some early trend national data that we're seeing. And back to the second question, second really comment was a question, was communicating sort of internally about building a culture of philanthropy. I believe that advancement, fundraising, and alumni engagement, communications are a team sport. And the more people know about what it is you're trying to do, the better they'll understand what we're ultimately trying to accomplish. So communicating your goals and in fact, I'm a really strong advocate of involving them in the planning process before we even go out to them with what our goals are. So and I talk about bringing in partners from our admissions area, from our student engagement area, from our career development area, from et cetera. When we build a plan around alumni engagement or for advancement, you bring them into the process so that when we go to implement the plan that we've put together, they've been part of generating what we've created so they understand that they're all playing a role in, you think about engaging alumni in the law school context, it doesn't just come out of the alumni person on the team or the advancement person. Alumni engagement goes all the way up to the dean, and everybody across the school are going to be involved in some way in engaging alumni and understanding what our goals are and outcomes we're trying to get to. Sometimes it's the dollar goal. Sometimes it might be we want to get all our kids hired or graduates hired, or or help in terms of recruitment and getting more kids to apply and come to blank law school. Those are all places where alumni can play a role, and understanding what those outcomes are early on in the process, I think is critical, and getting that buy-in from across the whole unit is going to be where you're going to see the most success. Schools that have built that culture, excuse me, are the ones that see that long sustainable success. And many of you know those schools and for their reputations, because they built that into their overall approach. Let me show you this next slide here. Heather, I hope I addressed the question there. If I didn't, jump in again and ask me another way.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. That was great.
So I want to leave time at the end for Q&A. So we're at one, I'm checking my time clock here. We're doing all right. So when we implemented this, again, it was at the center, but we applied it across even the schools across, we had 10 colleges and schools across the university. The goal in doing this, our expectations out of this were that we're going to really focus on enhancing the volunteer pipeline, getting the right people into the funnel, if you will, to get into volunteer roles, was a critical focus area for us here. We wanted to make sure we were doing things to support the development pipeline, not just, moving someone who's a non-donor to be an annual donor, right? That's important. But you'll see in a second, I have another chart about how we spent time working with our A and B level alumni to make sure they were feeling connected to the institution from an alumni engagement standpoint, so that they're more likely to go forward with making that large gift. I'll show you that in just a moment. Of course, you want to move people who are in the D category up into a more engaged category, whether it's a gift or another level. Delivering those key messages from a communication standpoint, delivering key messages to key audiences that go as far as to say as, what we say, how we say it, who we say it to, and who's it coming from, and all that are going to be important to think about. You can't do that with your entire population, but you can do it for a smaller targeted segment of the population. That's the beauty of this exercise. And I would argue that most places are already doing this. They just don't call it ABCD. And what I'm talking about here is building a more disciplined, strategic approach to focusing on those top people, and not it being a happenstance or a random outcome. This also allowed us to focus our regional activity. We, instead of trying to be all things to all people, we focused on the regions where we had, there was a point where maintaining 80 clubs was considered success in alumni engagement work. Maintaining the top 10 that have the highest concentrations of folks in these categories is a different outcome that we were approaching now to try to focus where we're going to do our regional activity. This is a chart that I created later on. This is not what we used at Cornell. Our numbers were slightly different. The gift level numbers might change depending on your institution, but basically the definitions of an ABCD, A, principal, high level major, B, major, maybe lag, high annual leadership annual gifts might be in that bucket. Again, those numbers could fluctuate. Everyone else is in the donor C category, the annual fund level. And volunteers, you'll see there's some, I'll show you an example here in a couple of slides of a slightly different definition where they took it a little bit more broadly and they added an E. You'll see that here in a second. And the D is that, future donors. Again, that column that's under gift level can fluctuate depending upon your institution. Don't get stuck on those numbers. This is just a basic model. This is what I was referencing earlier. This is what we thought about the goals of what we wanted to see out of this ABC. I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up. Number 4, we were always identifying, so our alumni staff in the center and our alumni staff in the law school were trained to help identify wealth so that you can find potential A and B level alumni who just weren't on the radar yet. And we were finding those people in all different populations. That was number 4. Number 3, of course, wanted to move people out of the D category and into some level of activity and engagement, attending an event, volunteering, or now communicating, and also being a donor. Number 2 is that we work very closely with our annual giving colleagues. In fact, we moved our whole operation to be co-located with our annual giving team so that we can spend more time thinking about how can we play a role in making sure that people that are C's stay C's. This is retention of our annual donors and making sure that that giving percentage stayed up. And then the first one here was number 1 on this list here is that we spent time working with our principal gift and major gift folks on how are we going to target engagement activity, communications activity to the alums who are in that A and B category. And we're talking about a handful of people each year. And in a law school context, it's going to be a very small number of people. But what we were saying was, what do we got to do over the course of FY25 to make sure that that person we're going to ask for a major gift is going to be most likely to say yes to us. And we're going to do things throughout the year from an alumni engagement, from a communication standpoint, to get that person, that particular person, not large population. We're talking about an individual targeted strategy now to make sure that those people were going to be more inclined to say yes to that ask when the time came. And that includes specific communications things that were sent to those individuals. That includes building events around certain people, having that person attend key events and introduce the president or the dean or whatever it might be. There's, again, very specific strategies, because you can focus that on a small number. You can't do that for 224,000 or 20,000 or 5,000, but you can for 5. And the point of this is to get you to the point where you're able to focus your efforts on those top people to move the needle on the things we need to move. So PowerPoint slide warning coming at you. The next slide is another institution. It's Providence College and their model of ABCD. And they took it a little bit further. They went to an E, and it's a lot on the slide. So I'll walk you through it pretty quickly. I won't belabor it, but you'll see how they applied it to their world. So this is a school that's got 60 some odd thousand alumni. And they went from left to right, A, B, C, D, E for them. They added this other category. Their E is basically what I defined as a D, and they kind of split out their C's into C's and D's, a little bit different levels here. So then if you look at the first column, first and second columns, you're talking about the definitions are principal, major, and their lifetime giving. So all very much development related columns here. And when you go to the second, well, I should say 1, 2, 3, 4, the column that says capacity, affinity / inclination. These are other markers that they were going to bring into the equation to say that person is an A or a B or a C. And then the next one over, you see volunteer status. You may not have any of those capacity rankings or ability to give, but you're in one of these other volunteer groups, we're to consider you in that category as well. And what they're building out right now is that very last column, which is the other indicators. And you'll see that for them, their fold is their priors of the last decade at Providence College, where they're building out a approach to their young alumni. They're going to include certain levels of people being A, B's, and C's that have a slightly different definition. So as long as you're hitting any of those markers there, you qualify in that you are in that category. And one other note on this is not something that is this is a back end, how we operate in our office. This is how the sausage is made. It helps you focus, helps provide the strategy and ultimately the tactics you need to deliver on various aspects of engagement, communication, and so on to these groups that are in these different levels. So this is not something where you go out and share with people who's in what category. I hope that's obvious. This is an internal approach of how you think about your population. Heather, you have another question?
Yeah, Chris, we got 2 more that came in. One is kind of related to what you were just saying. In this approach, are you abandoning the giving participation percentage? So a lot of schools are, very public about that percent of how many people give. And then the second part of it is focusing more on events and engagement with donors.
Yeah. So the answer to the first question, I'm not abandoning it. I do think it's a marker and indicator. But I would much rather see an institution, a law school, a central program, overall university reporting on their engagement data and their engagement percentage, their case score, if you will, than their percent giving score. Because the engagement score includes your giving percentage in it. It also includes people. To me, it's a better measure of who's engaged with your institution. Is that if you're communicating, experiencing, volunteering, or giving, or doing any one of those 4 things or all 4 of them, you count in the numerator, right? So your engagement percentage includes the giving part. I would rather see schools focusing on engagement rate than giving rate. I do know that there are boards, there are deans, there are even boards of trustees and college presidents who, I was just on a call earlier today where the entire call was to get the board of trustees to stop worrying about the giving percentage and focus on engagement and getting to $1 billion campaign goal. And that's a whole different way of thinking. The KPI there is it's a mind shift for a board of trustees to move away. So I guess the answer to the question is, am I encouraging people to do away with giving percentage? I think I am, is the answer, to be totally honest, because I think there's other markers that are more important that include giving. And I also know that the national trend is a downward line to the right, no matter where you are, no matter what school. The national trend in giving, we've gone from, as an industry, in 1992, the average giving rate was in the 20% range, high teens, and it's now 6 or 7%. And it's gone down steadily every single year. And if you put your institution against that, you're going to see similar trend line going down. Very few are flat. And I don't know, I may name a couple that have gone up over the years, but most schools are trending downward. Given that downward trend, and there's lots of other factors in the equation as to why this is happening, my encouragement is to think about a broader definition of how we define success in our work, and engagement, I think, is the right number there. So there's that. And the second question, I think, Heather, I heard what you say is, are we focusing on getting donors to be engaged and attending events? Is that?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So yes is the short answer to that question. Absolutely yes. I think we should be thinking about people who have capacity, who are donors, who have inclination. If we can measure any of those things, and most schools have data on those, is targeting them in a different way to attend our events, to become our volunteers, and to communicate with us in some meaningful way. Those are the three other case categories. I am not saying, so to me, that's a depth strategy. How do we get more people who have those indicators to be involved with our program? I don't think you abandon a breadth strategy completely, because if you do, you'll succeed in this campaign or this current fundraising year, and eventually the long term will hurt because you're not doing the stuff to build the base of people. So it's a matter of how you focus and where you deploy your resources. How much time and money are we spending on this population versus this population? I think both are important, one for the long term, one other for the short term. But what I'm addressing with this approach is that our industry of alumni engagement has focused on the entire population the same way forever. And I'm suggesting that we need to keep doing that, but also do this other more focused version of it. All right, so Heather,
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And I'll just say there was one more question that came in. Sorry. Yep. You mentioned affinity groups earlier, and someone said these groups that we have were formed to help raise money for our campaign, which was very successful. Do you have recommendations, or have you seen schools, transition post-campaign to how to use these groups for engagement purposes?
Yeah, it's a hard problem. There are even many schools that struggle with, you build up this work in a campaign, you have all these volunteers who did that work, and now they're sunset, but they're interested, right? You also have the same exact problem with alumni boards who you've built up, and they've gone through the process and they've cycled off, and they're sitting out there. And I've even seen it at a board of trustee level at a university, where you have these people at the most highest engaged level you can be, who sunset off, their terms are out, and they're out there, and there's dozens of them who feel like they've left the planet and they're not engaged at the institution anymore. So whoever you do that, having a concerted effort to focus on engaging past volunteers, getting them into new volunteer roles, and if they don't want those, to keep communicating with them in a meaningful way, to keep them connected to the institution, is critical. And that's a target audience. That's an A-B population there from a volunteer standpoint. One of the categories that the slide before that I had up for Providence, one of the reasons they did that is they want to be able to capture those people at a higher level so that we continue to communicate with them and engage them in ways that are meaningful. So it's a whole litany of things that you can do with that population of people, but knowing who they are, tracking them appropriately in your database, and making sure we have at least a communication strategy with them is going to cover the vast majority of the concerns under this broad category of how do you deal with past high-level volunteers. What you get them to go to and ultimately volunteer to help do might be nuanced based on your institution, kind of where you are in your history, but it's in a population I would definitely pay attention to. My answer to the question.
Chris, you just brought up a good point about meaningful engagement opportunities. And another question that just popped into the chat is, How do you find schools and universities are defining what meaningful engagement looks like?
Well, the definition of engagement is something that, so I was on the case task force that came up with the definition of alumni. It took us 5 hours. Definition of engagement, that took us like 7 hours. But the baseline is engagement can look lots of ways. You know, you have alums who wear your sweatshirt and put your license plate frame on their car and they hang their diploma behind their desk. Those are all people who care and are passionate. You know, they love their alma mater. But you can't measure any of those things I just mentioned, right? They all count as engagement and they all would be something that would indicate it. So the baseline of what we talked about was what I call reasonably measurable engagement is the experiential, communications, volunteer, and philanthropy. Meaningful is when you go deeper into those things. You're going to multiple events. You're coming back to campus for a multi-day reunion instead of going to something in your hometown. You're volunteering not just for a day to do X or an hour to call a prospective student or convince somebody why they should go to blank law school. That's a volunteer activity, but someone who sits on your board, someone who, you know, is coming back to campus on a regular basis as a volunteer, someone who is helping moderate a chat or a social media channel or Facebook page. Those are all deeper engagement acts that I would put in the meaningful category. So these are things that are going to get people spending more time, more effort, more, you know, the old time, talent, treasure, ties, and testimony. Those are my 5 T's that I throw out there. Those 5 T's are all things that people can do with more intentionality, with more depth that I think equal meaningful engagement. I think I'm answering the question, Jamie. And if I need to rephrase or restate, let me know.
No, I think you did. Thank you.
Good. So I was hoping so I use the term A's and B's. These are likely to be tracked prospects assigned to gift portfolios of your gift officers. You may have another system you use, but I was hoping that a few people might, I don't know, is it even possible? I apologize, I don't know the answer to this question, but can people come off mute and share, or would they have to put it in their chat or in their questions? Jamie, I'm asking you this question. I don't think they can come off.
I think they're going to have to put this into chat if they want to.
Yeah, apologies, I did not know that part. So if you have a chance to, because this will be recorded for going forward, if you're already doing something with a targeted population of your top donors from an alumni engagement or a communication standpoint, and you've said, we're going to treat that group differently, or maybe you haven't even said it, you just started doing it, right? It may be a tactical thing you're doing, not a strategic thing. I would love for you to put examples of these into the chat or into the Q&A so that we can have them for later on. Because I think most schools are already doing this, some version of this. What I'm providing is a framework for it. Frankly, what I'm providing for many clients is a common language for how to think about this. We started doing this, and after a while, people would say, you know, we're going to do this blank event. It's an ABCD event. Everyone's going to be included in it. Great, go for it. We knew how to deploy resources towards that. But when someone said, look, I think we need to do this event, it's really an A-B event. And we're going to focus it on in this way to accomplish this outcome. That changed the game of what resources and who was involved and how we were going to approach it. So it allowed us a common language, quite frankly, to discuss these things internally. I'm looking at the chat, see if anything's coming in. Jamie, do you see anything yet? Or
yeah, there's a couple, one person just posted, we do news stories on donors for our annual magazine or website.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So I've seen that a lot. You know, having your top donors host events in their homes during a campaign, you know, series of events around the country where you bring out the law school dean and you're going to go to a location where you may not have a main event, but you may have like a salon-like event. A lot of those A's and B's can be your host for events. They can introduce the dean at a larger scale of event. Those are opportunities I see a lot of people already doing. Heather, did you have something?
There was a question related to what you were just talking about. Basically, in the change management idea, you know, do you abandon those people that are out in the pasture at some point, given limited resources? And, you know, how do you kind of get people behind this ABCD idea?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you were a for-profit company The answer to that question is you probably would abandon those people out there. You wouldn't abandon them. You'd still have commercials hoping that they would get them, right? I'm thinking of like, I fly United Airlines. And I am a B, probably in United category. There's people that fly more than me that are A's. I fly a lot, and I'm a B. But the people that fly once a year are not on United's radar to treat differently. They're out in the pasture. They're going to get the commercial at halftime of the Super Bowl or whatever and be aware that United is an option for them, right? It's not a target audience. The for-profit says we're going to put our resources towards our most loyal customers to make sure that they're really happy and they keep flying with us in the United example. I'm using a for-profit customer-centric thing, but if you apply that same thinking to our world, I would suggest that you don't forget about them. I think what you do with that population is that you use digital and artificial intelligence strategies to continue to communicate and engage them. And when they raise their hand and they pop up above a D and become a D+ and they show up in some way, then we bring them into the fold and treat them a little differently. But until then, I don't think it's worth, with limited resources, I don't think it's worth spending time trying to get your, let's take a number, Heather and Jamie, how many alumni do each of you have at your institutions in the law school context? Give me a baseline roughly.
We're just shy of 13,300 here.
13,000, all right. And Heather?
We're pretty small because we're young, only 3,000.
3,000. So even that, let's take the 13,000 number in Indiana, right? If we applied this strategy to it, you're going to take 10,000 people and put them out there and say, we're going to focus on these 2,500 people at a C and these 500 people at A, B. And Jamie, your job is completely different to try to make sure those 500 people are having the airline experience that United wants their top flyers to have in terms of your law school alums to have with their institution. They have access to the dean, they have, so on. There's lots of things that come with that. I think you scale it that way. It provides you the ability to focus your resources, again, time, your staff, and so on, your budget on those top 500 people. I'm also aware it's 3 minutes till 2 and I have to stop. So other questions that are anything else come in the chat?
There was one additional comment to answer your question about A's and B's.
Yeah.
Re-engagement of former board members through twice a year state of the school sessions. I know here at Indiana University with our board of visitors, we've started to engage the former board members each year for one meeting. So it sounds like that could be a potential way to keep people engaged at those high levels.
Let me show my last 2 slides here in the last couple minutes. This is something that I use to help people make decisions. When I work with clients, I say these are the 6 questions you must ask before we do anything. So this is taking into account all the stuff you do, any initiative that you have. We want someone to become a volunteer. We're going to communicate with them in some way. We're going to invite them to an event and so on. I think you need to ask these 6 questions before you do anything. Number 1, first of all, you should have a plan. The assumption here is that you have a plan. And the first question is, does it align with that plan? Second question is, what's the desired outcome? Third one, who's the target audience? This is getting into the details of what we've just been talking about. I think as an industry, we do a pretty good job of asking these 3 questions. We've gotten better at this 4th one, how we're going to measure the success of this. And Case has given us a framework to help do some of that at an early stage. I think I'm going to make a comment here that could be controversial in this context, but if you work in the center or work in the law school or you're collaborating or not collaborating with, I don't think we do this number 5 very well. Who else on campus needs to know? There are often times where the center has no idea what the law school is doing and vice versa. There are times where I've seen them work together. And I think the more we can ask the question about who else needs to know that we're doing this, the better. That's my 5th question. And then the 6th one is, I don't think we do this at all. I don't even give us a grade on this one because I think we have an incomplete, which is, what's the plan to follow up after it's over? Because what happens in most alumni shops in the law school or in the central program, you move on to the next thing, the next tactic, the next busy work things coming down your lane, and you don't have time to do follow-up from the first thing. I'd say slow down, take the time. That was my alarm to shut up, and do a follow-up that's needed after each thing. So I will stop there and I'll put up one last slide that just gives you my email address. If you have questions, follow-up comments, or thoughts, please feel free to email me anytime. I'm happy. I will respond to you. Jamie, I'll kick it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Chris. And let's all give Chris a virtual round of applause for his efforts with us today. Hopefully shifting some paradigms and thoughts about how we can approach the work here at law schools. We are going to, we have a lot coming up. We're going to jump into NALP here soon, but we also have some presentations at 3 o'clock on communications. 4 o'clock on alumni programs that will touch on some of the aspects of things that Chris just spoke about. So at this point, I think I'm going to kick it off to Heather to introduce the next session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for being here. And we are so happy to have the folks from NALP with us this afternoon. They're going to talk to us about their study of U.S. law school alumni and employment satisfaction, which of course is important to all of our areas in the law school. So we're just so grateful for them to be here today. And then at the end of their presentation, we're going to go into breakout sessions hosted by some of our awesome executive board members for alumni relations, communications, and development. So please stick around so you'll have the opportunity to discuss what they present with your people. I'll kick it over to Nell. Thank you.
So thank you, Heather and Jamie. We're excited to be back with our AALS friends. We know you have a full day ahead of you, so we'll jump right in. My name is Skip Horn. I am the Vice President for Engagement for the NALP Foundation, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Fiona Trevelyan-Hornblower, President and CEO, and Jennifer Mandry, Vice President for Research. As Heather said, today we're going to share some highlights from one of our most popular annual research studies, and that's our Law School Alumni Employment and Satisfaction Study, a joint study that we conduct with NALP, which surveys law school alumni 3 years out from graduation from both U.S. and Canadian law schools. So we'll be sharing some data specific to the class of 2020, as well as a few trends from over 10 years of the survey. And we're particularly excited about this year's study because it's the first look at the first class to study in, graduate into, and start their careers during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're going to present a lot of information today, and don't feel the need to jot everything down. We're happy to share a copy of our PowerPoint with the section after our presentation. So just by way of background, we launched this study with NALP to query alumni well beyond the 10-month mark that's currently mandated by the ABA, and really specifically to explore more deeply some topics like career satisfaction, alumni engagement, and more generally return on investment in legal education. We launched the first beta study with the class of 2010, and we've been conducting the survey every year since. And then we expanded that to include Canadian law schools in 2017. Every fall, the deans of all the ABA-accredited law schools in the US and Canada receive an invitation to participate in the study. The contact at each school receives a unique survey link that they then distribute to their alumni, and all the data comes directly back to us and, of course, is kept anonymous and confidential. And let me just make a quick thank you to Access Lex Institute for their support of the alumni study. We're in year 3 of a multi-year grant to expand the participation of law schools in the alumni study to the 6 HBCU law schools, as well as a number of additional schools with underrepresented student and alumni populations. The alumni study itself is quite fulsome. We cover a lot of topics, as you can see here. Today, we're just going to highlight a few of these areas, and if you're interested in the rest of the study, of course, we encourage you to purchase your copy on the NALP Foundation website. So here's a quick snapshot of this year's alumni study. We received responses from over 1,500 alumni from across the US and Canada. Some of our new questions this year focus on the number of required days in the office, which is in addition to the questions we've been asking for the last couple of years about work environment, and leadership transparency and communication as a factor of career satisfaction. And we've continued to query such areas as the pandemic effect, educational debt, and professional identity formation. So to get us started, it's my pleasure to introduce Fiona Trevelyan-Hornblower, President and CEO of the NALP Foundation. Fiona?
Thanks so much, Skip, and it is wonderful to be with you all today and to share some of this intriguing data. So obviously, as Skip mentioned, one of the things we were really particularly curious about is what were the impacts going to be, if there were any, that were discernibly different for this class of 2020 heading into the launch of their careers with the full pandemic alongside them. So we will be digging into some of this in more detail, but we thought it'd be helpful just to show you sort of a quick summary. So we did see that there was actually strong alignment with the results that we have seen from prior studies in a number of key areas, including the number of jobs these folks have held by 3 years out, the levels of overall job satisfaction, and we continue to see relatively stable numbers of those reporting compensation over $300,000. That's really driven by the folks who are at the largest law firms. We did, however, see some shifts in the data that we'll be going into as well. We saw a decrease in the mobility reported by associates of color. So mobility simply means how many times they have moved positions in that 3 years. We also saw a continued decline in the intention of folks to seek a new job. Not surprisingly, fewer reported they are working fully remotely. We're seeing many organizations now shifting either to a hybrid system or to fully return to the office. We did see female average educational debt increase, as well as I mentioned, the number of graduates working completely in the office. So where are these graduates? These are your future major donors that you were just talking about how to connect with. We want to help you know where they are, what they're doing, and how you can tailor your messaging to them. So first, the very good news. We had a very high level of employment reported. Now, there's a lot of attention that gets given to the employment at graduation and at the 10-month ABA and NELP reporting deadline. But this is really interesting because it shows us that by 3 years out, 97%, and this has been true for the last couple of years as well, 97% of these alumni are employed after graduation. So that's great news. So when either students or even younger alumni are asking that question, will I get a job? Yes, you and your law school colleagues can be confident that the vast majority of these folks are going to be gainfully employed after graduation 3 years out. But then we want to parse it a little bit more finely and ask, are they practicing law? Are they deploying the JD degrees that they and everybody else has struggled so mightily for them to have? And again, we see a very high percentage, 87% reporting that they are practicing law. So a little bit lower than that overall employment figure, but still very high at 87%. Interestingly, we have seen an increase, as you can see on this graph, overall since the class of 2011 in the figures reporting that they are practicing law. This has steadily climbed. So I want to parse this out a little bit more carefully for you all. The blue line that you'll see is the total number of all the alumni participating in the study. So we'll see that blue line with some bobs and weaves is really in a very nice steady upward trajectory. We do see a little bit of a divergence though when we look at white graduates, the red line, versus graduates of color. While the red line has continued that upward trajectory, we've seen over the last couple of years at the green line, graduates of color, we are seeing an increasing gap between the reported levels practicing law for white associates, alumni and graduates of color. So that's something that we all want to keep an eye on going forward. When we parse this out by gender and by various racial and ethnic groups, we see there's very little difference between males and females. 87% of males report that they are practicing law, 88% female. We had 63% of non-binary reporting that, but that's a relatively small cohort, so that particular number should be viewed somewhat with caution. We see a little bit more divergence, though, when we look at white graduates at 89% versus graduates of color at 84%. And when we break out that graduates of color, we see some even more significant divergences between various different cohorts here. So, for example, at the relatively low end, we've got Black or African American graduates, 73% of them reporting that they are practicing law. That climbs to 79% for Asian graduates. We have relatively small numbers in the Native American or Native Alaskan and Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander self-reporting categories, so they are at 100%. But more compelling are the stats around multiracial at 89% and Latinx at 94%. So we know these folks are working. We know the vast majority of them are practicing law. How are they practicing law? Well, a little bit over half are in private law firms. That's far and away the location or the type of practice most of your alumni are engaged in, followed closely by 13% both in business or corporations and in government, with a smattering of folks in a variety of other different types of work settings, including public interest, public defenders, prosecutors, and education and judicial clerkships. When we break this out a little bit further by gender and also white graduates of color compared to graduates, white graduates compared to graduates of color, we do see some slight divergences by gender, particularly in the business and corporation area, where we have more males reporting that they're working in that work setting than we do female. And we see the reverse in the figures reporting that they are working in government, with more females reporting that at 15% than males at 12%. We see larger gaps start to emerge when we compare white graduates versus graduates of color. Again, in business and corporations, we see only 11% of graduates of color, white graduates reporting that rather, and 17% of graduates of color. And then when we look down a little bit further, we see for public defenders, we're seeing 12% for white graduates and 4% for graduates of color. Breaking out the specific cohorts within graduates of color, we again see some divergences here as well. Law firm practice, as I mentioned, top across the board, but for Asian and for Black or African American ones, we see business and corporations really rising up to be one of the top employment sources for them, so at 21 and 23%. We see a number of cohorts reporting relatively high levels of employment in government, 8% for Asian, 18% for Black or African American, and 13% for Latinx. Interestingly, for the MENA graduates, we see 46% in law firms, but also 46% in business or corporations, so an interesting divergence there. And then finally, when we look at where the class of 2020 is sitting based on LGBTQ plus status or disability status, we see again, the top is the law firm as the locus for just under half of those self-identifying as LGBTQ plus. A little bit lower, 37% for those who self-identify as having a disability, with government coming in then close behind at 15 and 19% for those cohorts, followed by business and corporations at 12% for both. So this slide is the very good news. Overall, we're seeing very high levels of satisfaction for these alumni with their current job. You'll see just under half say they're actually extremely satisfied, and then another goodly chunk, 38%, are saying they are somewhat satisfied. So we have very limited numbers of folks that 3 years out are actually not happy with the position that they have at the time that they were interviewed. So we also give folks the opportunity to share with us in their own words what the relative value of law school was for them. So it's not surprising, we got lots of comments that it was helpful for preparing for the bar exam, but also they also comment that it helped them develop broad skills, including networking, and they particularly point to the value of experiential education, as well as the key role of faculty. And then finally, it's provided them with a key professional network. So these are things that you can key into when you are thinking about the messaging that you're using with graduates, as these are some of the things that they are telling us, and therefore you, what are the things that are most valuable as they look back at their law school experience and what their law schools gave them. Now, because this is the first pandemic class, they also had some things to share about what it felt like to graduate into that. And not surprisingly, there were a lot of them who are not happy campers because they missed out on some of the key milestones for this, particularly graduation ceremonies and recognition. And we know that that was tough for law schools to figure out how to navigate that. But as you're thinking about the messaging for this group, it bears remembering that they had this experience of feeling like they didn't get that particular celebration or recognition that they had worked so hard for and anticipated. There was also, a number or a certain level of concern articulated that they felt abandoned. There weren't the resources that they would have hoped for. It was a little bit more challenging for them to try and land those positions, and they probably were looking to overall strained resources at law schools, such like career services, and not feeling that they were getting the support that they would have liked to have received at that time when they were trying to launch their careers, recognizing the larger pandemic environment. So mobility, as I mentioned, this just means how many jobs have these folks had in the relatively short period of time, 3 years since they graduated. So we're actually seeing very high levels of mobility for these folks. They reported the bulk of them, 70% report that they have already had 2 or more positions by this relatively junior point in their careers. That's actually up from what we've seen historically. It's usually hovered around 2/3. So we did see that increase. Whether it is directly attributable to the pandemic, we're not sure at this point. So we'll need the data points from the upcoming class to see if we're continuing to see a climb in mobility. But these people have hopped a relatively frequent number of times since they left your law schools. When we take a look at that historic perspective, we just wanted to show this to you. So as you'll see, it's been relatively steady, hovering at around that 66 percentage point that I mentioned, with 2/3 of graduates reporting 2 or more positions across the board. The one exception, as you'll see, is the graduates of color line, the orange one. That has traditionally been higher, or historically been higher, than the mobility level for their majority peers. It plummeted during the pandemic with the class of 2017. They were actually interviewed in 2020, 3 years out after graduation, but it has then climbed back above the general reported mobility level, but now is dovetailing again with both this class, where it was very, very close, and also for the prior class. So we're going to be watching that one carefully to see if it continues to dovetail, or if we see divergences again between the mobility rates for graduates of color and their majority peers. As I mentioned, we had very low levels of these folks reporting that they are actively seeking new positions. So that means that they are the ones out there. They're not just sort of passively receiving calls from headhunters, et cetera. It got to a historic low this year of 11%. As you'll see, it's been steadily declining over the last decade that we've been doing this. That's good news in that they are a little bit more contented, but we have to compare that with the overall mobility levels that I just shared. When we break the intention to seek a new job out by cohort, we also see some interesting divergences in the data here. Very little difference by gender, male 13% reporting that, female just a little bit lower at 12%, 50% of non-binary though, reporting that they are actively seeking a new job. White graduates, 11%, right at that national level. A little bit higher, 16% for graduates of color. And again, looking at this within specific demographic cohorts, we see that 21 and 22% of Asian and Black or African American graduates report that they are actively seeking another job. So that's nearly twice the level of the national average and of their majority peers. We see slightly lower, but still higher than the national averages for MENA, and then multiracial quite close at 12%. And then, as I mentioned, given the small numbers for the Native American, Native Alaskan, Hawaiian, or the Pacific Islander populations, 33%, but we want to view those figures with caution. So we know they're working. We know they're relatively happy where they're working. So why are they changing jobs? Why are we seeing this high level of mobility? So we're going to walk through a couple of the reasons that the alumni shared with us. Not surprisingly, for those of you in law schools, better compensation and bonuses is the driver for 59% who say they're looking to make a move, as are better benefits. Community and development reasons also, though, rise to the top here. And the interesting thing for us in looking at this data is that there's a relatively narrow band when you look at the percentages reported for all of these. So attitude or fit concerns at 41%, better support for work-life balance at 38%, looking for mentors or role models at 34%. Skipping down to this bottom one, better support for well-being and mental health. That's over half of the responding graduates saying that that is a driver for job changes. So as you're having conversations with alumni, you can be attentive to which of these drivers are things that they are thinking about that may be leading them to think about making a change. Additionally, obviously, practice career factors come into play at a significant level, with the two primary leading ones being they're looking to pursue a specific practice area interest. So that could play out in a number of ways. It could be that they're looking to switch practice areas, or it could be that they're looking to deepen their engagement with a specific practice area and don't feel that they can do that at their current organization. The second one is really intriguing. If they don't see clear advancement paths, so there isn't a prospect of development for them, that's something that makes them start thinking very much about whether they need to make a job change. And then about a fifth of them are saying they're thinking of changing to make a change to a different type of legal job. So we know that they're working, that they're practicing law, that they're changing jobs pretty frequently, and some of the reasons that we're doing. So now Jennifer is going to take us through a deeper dive into what some of the drivers are for these graduates. Jennifer.
Thank you, Fiona. So next, as she said, we'll look at some drivers and the impact they have on graduates, especially with their satisfaction with their jobs and careers at these early stages in their career. So first slide details educational debt. And again, this is educational debt out 3 years post-graduation. And we can see that the significant levels of debts that many students incur, that this topic really has been of great concern. So we inquire graduates to let us know what that debt load they're carrying at this point in time. And we can see it's very high at this 3-year mark. For all graduates, that mean score is, or the mean level of debt is 95,000. And roughly 86% of that is attributable directly to law school. When we compare male and female, females have traditionally had higher levels. In this instance, with the class of 2020, it was about 102,000 versus 89,000 for male, and non-binary is a bit higher as well at 98,000. Troublingly, we consistently see graduates of color carry much higher levels of debt at this point. In this case, it's 122,000 versus 83,000 for graduates of color. And then when we look within graduates of color, we can see that that debt load really does vary quite a bit, with Asian graduates and multiracial graduates reporting the lowest levels of debt. When we look at LGBTQ graduates, they really do fall in line with all graduates overall, but those with disabilities carry much higher level at almost 110,000. And I'll also mention this range of debt really varies greatly. It's from zero debt all the way up to one poor individual had $450,000 worth of debt at this point. 42% of graduates are carrying debt of $100,000 or more at this point. And then on the happier side, we have 33% that reported no educational debt at this point. When we look at the impact of debt on job satisfaction, we do see that it has a modest correlation with the level. So if we look at those who are reporting that they are extremely satisfied or somewhat satisfied with their debt, the overall satisfaction for those who have zero debt level is at 89%. For those who are carrying a debt up to 100,000, it's at 86%. And then for those who are carrying debt for more than 100,000, it's at 83%. So it dips there as well. Alumni were asked to indicate their main effects of their educational debt, and they do report that they feel the weight of their debt in many different ways. It's influencing their job choice, but it's also having a significant impact on their life choices, such as delaying home ownership or when to have children, reduced credit scores, etc. We've broken out the debt levels here that graduates are carrying, and not surprisingly, as the debt level increases, we can see an inverse impact negatively on these graduates, and that's even including a negative impact on mental health and well-being. Fiona shared that we see high levels of this. I have another slide later on that I'll be showing that shows high levels of this too. Those who reported zero debt, it's at 2%. For those carrying up to 100,000, that increases or jumps to 44%. And then for those who have more than 100,000, over half the graduates are reporting this.
Jennifer, there's a question that popped in. Would you prefer to wait until the end?
We could answer it now.
It deals, I think, with this topic here about debt load. Someone wants to know whether or not there was a measurement on student loan forgiveness prevalence amongst law school graduates.
You know, we did not ask that in the survey this time, but it's really great to hear of what interest is, because we use this feedback to expand our survey each year. So we'll definitely take note of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next we'll move on to total annual compensation for these graduates at this 3-year mark. So this next chart details annual compensation. It includes salary and bonus and profit sharing. And we'll see the bulk of graduates reported incomes generally between 76,000 and 200,000, with about 10% reporting incomes above that amount and 11% reporting incomes just below that amount. The bulk of them are at 101,000 to 150,000, with that 28%, and then followed with about a quarter with 76,000 to 100,000. This year, those reporting more than 300,000 is 6%, and that remains static from the years prior. With all the salary wars and high mobility and talent swirl that was occurring over the past few years, we had really started to see, although it's small, a lot of upticks in that more than 300,000 mark. The year prior to that, it was at 4%, and it had been at 2%. So we'll continue to watch and see if that changes at all moving forward. While the pandemic has waned troublingly, 34%, so a third of graduates are reporting that the pandemic continues to negatively affect their mental health and well-being. Now, the good news is that's slightly down from the class prior, for the class of 2019. For males and females, you can see it definitely has a larger impact on on females at 36%, and particularly women of color at 37% as well. Now, non-binary is at 100%, but again, the numbers are very low for this cohort, so that may impact the results. For LGBTQ graduates, it's at 50%, and those with a disability at 61%. So again, much higher for those cohorts as well. So we also want to note, we look at the data, we slice and dice it in many different ways, including current work positions as well as law school rank. And we do see many different variances in the data by law school cohorts. And here's just a list of some of them, including the number of jobs that are held. For example, we see those in the highest ranked schools have the greatest stability. Also, work settings, we see a linear correlation with this. The percent of graduates working in law firms progressively decreases with law school rank. Same with whether or not they decide to practice law. We see reported levels decline with school rank, although the vast majority of graduates are practicing law at this point. Also, compensation, the data showed increasing inverse impact as the law school rank declined. Both the median and the average debt loads climbed with law school rank as it fell. And then all this information is detailed in our full report that's available on our website. So next, we're going to move on to postgraduate law school engagement. So for several years, this study's probed alumni preferences for their postgraduate law school engagement with their schools. And we also take a look at some of the barriers that exist to their ongoing engagement. So we recognize that not all schools that participate in our study have comprehensive career-related resources and support available for their alumni. So first, let's look at the preferred methods for postgraduate employment. We can see too, I'll note that they've been very consistent over the last few years. Here are the rates for the class of 2020, and far and away the most popular method for alumni to engage with their school is networking events, and that's over half at 56%. And that's followed closely by mentoring programs at 45%. And then after that is alumni weekends and reunions with about a third. We have about a fourth of graduates who selected on-campus speaking opportunities or postgraduate career assistance, and student organizations and affinity groups as their preferred methods. However, the two most common methods that schools use for engaging with their alumni, including service and alumni association and financial contributions, were cited at the lowest levels at 15% as well as 7%. And then notably, we saw 5% of the alumni report that they did not want to remain engaged with their school in any of these ways. So we'll further break the data out. And when we look by gender in those gender identity in those first three columns, Preferences really did differ. While networking was consistently the preferred method for both females and males at 56 and 57%, male graduates preferred alumni weekends and reunions at higher rates in that top row at 39% versus 30% for male or females. And females identified mentoring programs at 48% more often than their male peers at 42%. We also see that non-binary graduates gravitated towards mentoring programs and student organizations and affinity groups, both at 67% as their preferred engagement methods. The last two columns outline race and ethnicity. And here the data shows that graduates of color prefer networking events at higher levels at that 63 versus 53% for their white peers, as well as student organizations and affinity group events at 32% versus 21% for their white peers. And they valued mentoring programs slightly less and saw those to be slightly less interesting as a whole. So next we'll look at within graduates of color and networking events. If we look about 5 rows down right in the middle, we're the leading engagement mechanism across graduates, color of cohorts. Although there were some more important distinctions. For example, we really saw a range. We ranged from 0 mentions all the way up to 68% for Asian graduates. When we looked at financial contributions, that 3rd row down, Black or African American and multiracial graduates cited these at higher rates at 11% and 9%, although the level is still quite low, while even fewer Latinx and Asian graduates cited these at 1% and 2%. And additionally, Asian graduates identified on-campus speaking opportunities and service in alumni organizations, far less than their peers did. And MENA graduates had the lowest rates for alumni weekends and reunions and student organization and affinity groups as well. When we look at some additional demographic cohorts, LGBTQ plus graduates preferred mentoring programs and networking events equally, each at 51%, and identified student organizations or affinity groups at even higher rates, 34% versus 25% than their overall group of class of 2020 peers did. Within graduates who have disabilities, they mentioned mentoring programs at the top at 48%, so that's nearly half, and that was followed by networking events at 43%. This cohort also identified alumni weekends and reunions at lower levels when compared to their overall class, so at 23% versus 33% overall. So next we'll look at some of the barriers to engagement. And again, relatively, we've been tracking this for 3 years. We really have seen historically the results to be very consistent. When graduates were asked to identify which, if any, barriers occurred to their postgraduate engagement with their schools, overwhelmingly, we saw that most graduates, 80%, reported that they had at least one barrier. They named limited time at 44% and location and geography at 37% as the leading barriers. Nearly a quarter of graduates cited lack of interest at 23%, and then 15% identified their student debt as a barrier. And then we have some comments on the right-hand side. These are just some of the narrative comments that we collect throughout the data collection process. And you can see that they reflect many different areas, including receiving minimal outreach from the school or attempts to connect with the school unanswered. Primary communication that they receive from the school is request for donations. And then one alumni shared that the law school was just a very challenging time, and so they decide not to engage after.
Jennifer, another question popped in regarding definitions of mentoring in the survey. Did you do anything to define what that meant, whether it was alumni to student, alumni to alumni?
We didn't, it was just mentoring overall.
Okay. And then another question regarding the engagement statistics. Is it just, is it measuring what they prefer or what they've actually participated in thus far?
It's what they prefer. What would their preference be?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So when we look at the barriers to engagement by gender identity, as well as race and ethnicity, males graduates less often reported barriers overall. So 24%, about a quarter of them said they did not, versus have any barriers, versus 18% of females, while all the non-binary graduates reported having at least one such barrier. Also, non-binary graduates reported lack of interest at 57% in that third column, at rates that were twice that of their male and female peers, where they were at 25% and 24%. Also, graduates of color noted limited time and lack of interest at lower rates at 40% than their majority peers did, and versus 47% for white graduates. And then we also saw some divergences when we look at within associates of color. Again, limited time and location and geography were the leading barriers for most of these cohorts, while MENA graduates, if we look way down in the bottom row over to the right, reported having no barriers at rates roughly twice that of the peers. It was at 53%. The others ranged from 0 up to 33%. Notably, all LGBTQ plus and graduates, as well as graduates with disabilities, stated that they had at least one such barrier to their post-graduation. LGBTQ plus graduates more often reported location and geography at 45% than did their overall class of 2020 peers, which was at 37%. And both LGBTQ plus and those with disabilities identified lack of interest at 30 and 29%, at rates higher than the entire class of 2020 did at 23%. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and go on to postgraduate sources. So we also examined career assistant levels. So how many have reached out for postgraduate career assistant by this point in time? And interestingly, unlike graduates prior to the pandemic, the majority of the class of 2020 reported that they had reached out to their law school for postgraduate career assistance. We can see in that chart, the column chart on the left, for the class of 2018, it was at 23%. It dipped down somewhat to 20% for the class of 2019. And then for the class of 2020, it jumped up to 52%, so over half. When we look on the right-hand side chart, this shows those that they've actually reached out to. So that a source that they've gone to for assistant, and faculty member and career service offices were the leading point of contacts for most at 27 and 34%. And while they've remained to be the leading points of contact over the years, for the class of 2020, these rates were much higher. And we also do have graduates that reach out to their alumni office at 10%, and then other administrative offices at 8%, or other sources at their school, an additional 10%. So we'll have the data broken out by gender identity, as well as race and ethnicity, and male and non-binary graduates reached out to faculty members at slightly higher rates than did their female peers. So 37 and 38% versus 32%. And graduates of color reached out to career services offices at higher rates than their white peers did as well, 31% versus 25%. Within graduates of color, although faculty and the career service offices were primary points of contact for most, we really did see those contact rates range considerably. For example, Asian and Latinx graduates contacted their faculty and career service offices at similar rates, about a third each. Black or African American and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander and multiracial graduates were more likely to reach out to faculty members compared to other sources, and MENA graduates were more likely to reach out to their career service offices at that 50% in the last row on the right, compared to other sources. Among both LGBTQ and those with disabilities, the two most frequently cited points were similar. They were the same with faculty and career service offices at about a third each. But these rates were higher than the rates that were reported for the overall general class of 2020. So we've given you a lot of data to look at and digest. We just wanted to mention schools are using our data in many different ways, and these are many different areas within the schools can utilize the data. Many thanks to those of you who are from schools that have participated in our study. If you have not, we would love you to join our study in the future, and Skip will be providing a few more details on that in a slide or two. Also, schools that participate in our study receive the aggregate data from a report detailing all of the data from all the schools that had participated for that particular year or class. We do not identify the schools by name, but we do aggregate their data and report it and slice it and dice it in many different ways. Also, the schools that participate receive a tailored report with their own alumni's responses. So it's a school-specific report. So it really allows for rapid competitive benchmarking. They not only receive their empiric data, but all of their narrative responses as well. So now I'll turn it over to Skip.
So thank you, Jennifer. We want to get you to your breakouts soon. But after all that, it's hard to believe it's already time to launch our next alumni study for the class of 2021. As Jennifer mentioned, if any of your law schools would like to participate, it's not too late. We're going to be sending out invitations in November. We'd love to have as many law schools as possible participate. The more responses we have, the more robust the data is. So please drop us a note after the presentation, and we're happy to follow up with you. And then we've mentioned before, all of our resources, including the Law School Alumni Employment and Satisfaction Study, are on our website at www.naupfoundation.org. And we'll turn it back over to Jamie and Heather for any questions, and then we'll go into breakouts.
Thank you so much. So we have been monitoring the chat just to see if there are any other additional questions that came in, and we're just about out of time. Let's just make sure we did define the mentoring program. So thank you. There was a question about the ranking tool. What ranking tool are you referencing? That was quite a few slides back. I don't know, Marianne, if you want to jump in to clarify what your question was.
So the ranking tool is the U.S. News and World Report rankings, flawed as they are and controversial as they may be, but still relevant for this class because they were still in effect as of 3 years ago.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So if folks are able to stick around and go into the breakouts, it looks like we got the official word. We are still going to do the breakouts. So thank you to Judy Asbury, who's going to lead the communications breakout session, Stephanie Silvestri, who will lead the alumni relations breakout session, and Mary Ann Soden, who will lead the development officers breakout. So you should see the Zoom breakout pop up to join the rooms. There we go. And we'll see you back here. Thanks so much. Slowly but surely, everyone is coming back. Thank you so much for 2 awesome first sessions. It went so fast. We're going to jump right into our 3rd session here. And we're very grateful to our presenters, Charlie Melikar and Mara Yankee, who I think has the greatest title on earth, Deputy Director of Storytelling. That just sounds fabulous. And Charlie joins us from Foster Consulting, where he is a principal. And I actually heard him on Chris Marshall's podcast from the CMAC company. So I see some folks are still joining, but I think we can kick this off. Charlie, I believe, is here as well. Yes, there he is. So I'll turn it over to you all, and I'll get out of the way. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for having me. I'm going to get us started and then kick it over to Charlie when I'm finished. Fun story about my storyteller title. I actually have a tattoo on my arm that says storyteller, though I did have it 10 years before I got this job. And people often think that maybe I went out and got it after I got my title. So I'm having to clarify that often, but it is a fun title to have. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can get my presentation loaded here. Okay, and let me get this in present mode. Are you all seeing that all right, hopefully? Someone shout if you can't. So, all right, fabulous, thank you. I'm Mary Yankee. I'm Deputy Director of Storytelling at Indiana University. So what that means is that I lead a team of writers in our Central Communications office, and we cover various areas of the university, focused heavily on Indianapolis and Bloomington, which are our core campuses, but collaborating with our 7 other regional campuses across the state to tell stories about the wonderful things happening at the university. And we, of course, have priorities that we focus on and a strategy behind that. And we'll talk about some of that as we go through our presentation, but hopefully what I talk about today will give you some ideas to leverage in your offices. So humans really have been telling stories since we acquired language, right? Passing stories from person to person has been how we learn about each other, how we learn about the world, how we've survived at times, right? It really is what makes us human and what binds us together as a society, provides that kind of glue for cultures. And it's evolved a ton over time. So we, starting with those oral traditions, moving into written word when the printing press took off, that then kind of transitioning into broadcast era. And that's really where brands started to leverage storytelling, right? Thinking about Mad Men and the golden age of advertising. But even that was so different from today, because you think about that time and many of the audiences were captive, right? Whoever could afford, whatever brand could afford the most expensive spots was getting to tell those stories. And frankly, they didn't have to be the best stories because they were paying for them to go to their audiences who didn't have as many options. Now we're looking at this digital era, which we're going to talk about some, right? And it's kind of survival of the fittest. People are participating in storytelling. They're picking and choosing what kind of media they consume. And so we have to be telling the most important stories about our brands for them to break through to the audiences that we're trying to use. So it can be challenging, but it's also very exciting because we have these audiences engaging with us and spreading our message in a way that wasn't really happening during a more passive era. Okay, let me see if I can get my perfect. So, like I said, we are competing for folks' attention much, much more than we ever have been before. So having those great stories and being strategic about it is more important than ever. It's not enough for us just to be giving people the information about our goods and services. We have to be telling them stories that make them feel connected to our brands, our institutions on a really a moral level, right? Making them feel like their values align with our values. And that's where I feel that those of us working in higher education, our jobs can be pretty easy. There's so many amazing stories that make it very easy to help folks kind of understand why our values align with theirs. And if we tell the right stories, like I mentioned, we can make our audiences brand ambassadors and have them pass along these stories for us in a way where they can reach so many more audiences than they were able to before the advent of social media. So what exactly makes a good story? Every story should have a hero. And I think it can feel like, oh, well, my institution should be the hero, right? But what we found really resonates more with folks is if the hero is kind of someone like them, right? And that hero can be on a quest and our institution is the one helping them on that quest. We talk some about mirrors and windows too when we're talking about that hero. So there may be a strategic reason that you want that hero to be a mirror of your audience, for them to be able to relate to them and see themselves in that hero in your story. Or there may be a strategic reason where you need that audience to understand someone who is not like them. And that's where the window comes in, right? Providing a window into someone else's life where you need them to kind of sympathize with them, understand what their experience is. But the key here is that your brand, your institution is always kind of the helper, the mentor on that hero's quest. So you found a great story. That's a great start. That's not always enough, right? There has to be a strategy behind what stories you're telling and why. So starting with the why is absolutely key. What are your strategic goals? And then working backwards to understand how storytelling can advance those. And when I'm talking about goals, it's really important to make sure that your goals are outcome based, not output based. So it isn't, oh, we want to post 10 stories a week. Well, why? You could post 10 pretty bad stories a week and be hitting that goal and maybe not advancing any of your strategic goals. Are you wanting more folks to learn about a certain program? Are you wanting more folks to just even know about your school? Then we need to be looking at engagement, right? How many people are visiting the site? How many people are reading the stories? How many people are sharing the stories? So it's important to consider goals that are outcome based, not output based. Once you've kind of got those goals, then you can craft key messages that support those. So key messages are really main points of information that you want your audience to hear, understand, and remember. What are the 3 things you want your audience to think of or know about when they think of your institution? And they should be directly connected to your goals, and they should be directly connected to your stories, right? They're kind of that bridge. So every story should either illustrate or include one of those kind of key messages. And that can really be helpful to prioritize story and communications. Like I said, in higher ed, I feel like we have a never-ending number of amazing stories. Just students on their journeys are such compelling stories. But not always are they going to serve your goals. And I'll talk about a couple examples where we've had to streamline. So for us here at Indiana University, our kind of key messages are bridge between our goal and our stories is our strategic plan. So everything we do is telling the story of how Indiana University is inching closer towards the goal set out in the IU 2030 strategic plan. So every story that we write is somehow illustrating one of these 3 pillars: student success, transformative research, service to our state, and beyond. There are plenty of cool stories that come across our desk that don't necessarily include these key messages, and we have to pass. So for example, one of our alumni was just named a new cast member at Saturday Night Live. That's so cool. But he studied business when he was at Indiana University. He was not involved in theater. He was not involved in improv here. So there was not an easy way for us to show how we were that mentor on his quest. So it just was not a strategic story for us to tell, and we passed. Thinking about audience can also help you streamline or prioritize stories, right? Who are you trying to talk to? That's going to be part of your goal, right? A lot of times it's multiple audiences, and one story could be used to reach multiple audiences. Sometimes your audience is going to be pretty general, all alumni. Sometimes it's going to be extremely specific. And because we have these social media tools and these email marketing tools that let us do really, really small segmentation, we can make those very specific. They could be internal audiences, faculty, staff, students. It might be external. We might be wanting media to report the story. We might be wanting legislators to know about what's going on. Peer institutions, prospective students, right? Sometimes the same story can apply to all those audiences. Sometimes you can tweak the delivery of those stories. How are you getting that information to those audiences? Sometimes you can just kind of tweak the framing and use that same story for the audience. So really thinking about who you're trying to reach, where they're consuming their media, what they care about can make our digital storytelling so much more impactful. And being able to stretch the stories as well. And what I mean, we kind of the next step of what I was just referring to, right? The same story may be applicable if you just kind of reframe it a bit. So you maybe have a story that is perfect for a blog section on your website. That same story may be of interest to a reporter, and you want to share that with them so they can pursue their own story. There may be some kind of visual potential, and I will say that every story, when we're talking about digital storytelling, everything we do needs to include an image at the very least, right? No one's going to engage with something on a website or on social media if there aren't images included. And video is even better for that social component. Paying to boost some stories on social media can be extremely affordable. There doesn't need to be a huge advertising budget to make sure that a certain section of your audience sees something on social media. Including these stories in faculty staff newsletters, in student newsletters, in alumni newsletters. Using maybe a tiny part of a story in a paid ad can help stretch these stories. Paying for sponsored content, which is hopefully we all know what sponsored content is, but for those of you who don't, is something that looks like a news story, but you've paid to place it online in an online publication. Maybe you've got a dean who sends out a weekly email and you can use tidbits from a story you've written in that email, link to it. Just making sure that every time you found a perfect nugget that serves your goals, that you're using it in every way that you can and being strategic about it. So I'm going to provide one example where we did that. Here at Indiana University. So if you didn't know, Indiana University Bloomington offers more foreign languages than any other university in the country. We are a leader at foreign language instruction, and that includes how we're teaching foreign languages. So anytime we can jump at a story that shows that, we are all about it. And of course, AI is on everyone's brain. It's very newsworthy. So this was a perfect story for us to pursue. We have a faculty member who has been leading really the national conversation about how to use AI tools in foreign language instruction. He traveled internationally throughout the summer to present about this. Because this was such a perfect nugget for us, we repurposed it in so many ways. We had a story on our News at IU site. We shared that across our own social media channels. We pitched it and actually had a reporter from our local newspaper, the Herald Times, write a story about it. And we also incorporated it into paid sponsored content that we ran in the Herald Times and on the broader USA Today network. So just another example of really stretching content when you find that perfect, great story that fits your goals and that can be appealing to more than one audience. And that is all I have for you. I feel like I sped through that. But of course, I'm hanging around for the Q&A section, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and kick it over to Charlie.
Great. Thank you. So I'll kind of pick up from here. And so, yeah, there are a lot of important building blocks, a lot of important just overall strategy to have in mind as we're talking about storytelling. It comes down to, I love the way you talked about, selecting stories, and I'll say more about this, but I'm going to bring us into the advancement lens here and really talk about, okay, how does this work in an advancement environment? What does it mean when we're talking about storytelling for the kind of work that you are all doing, knowing that curating those stories is a pretty important part of the job. I spent time on campuses early in my career at UMBC in Baltimore and Colgate University in New York and Vanderbilt down here in Nashville. And I used to say, we work in content-rich environments. You walk out the door and you'll stumble over 17 good stories. So the finding of the stories is part of the job. Like you said, picking the right stories to tell for the right purpose at the right time to the right people, that's the hard part. Right? Because some of the easiest stories to tell just sometimes are the ones that are, they're nice, but maybe they don't really move the ball back to what you said, ball down the field, back to what you said before about goals. Why are we bothering to try to earn people's time and attention through storytelling? And we have to be really clear about that. So I always like to start with one of my favorite quotes here, and we can replace fundraising with engagement, but I love this, almost the generosity of it, that what we're doing, fundraising, engagement, activation of our people, it's an invitation in, right? It's so easy to talk about how we need a bigger megaphone. We need to tell people more. We need to be more places. And that's for us. And I really like the idea of just kind of starting out our strategy, starting out conversations like this, talking about we're actually inviting people in. We want them to be a part of it. And I think if we have that in mind, it really helps us frame the kind of stories that we're looking to tell, knowing that the best way to invite people in is to get them interested in our story, right? Get them interested in what are we doing? Tell really good stories about what's going on here and compel people to want to be invited in. And when they are invited, that they'll accept that invitation. Also, and this was said already, but I think it's worth putting a pin in, this is an incredibly noisy time, an incredibly noisy environment. People are bombarded with just a lot of messages and messaging and content and different forms of content. So it's important to recognize for them, not just for us, but for the people we're trying to communicate with, they're getting an awful lot thrown at them, right? They're getting messages from everywhere. We have to respect that and then cut through it. We have to kind of make sure that we've got a story that's worthy of telling to activate them in support of something, right? And for our purposes here in advancement, especially at the law school level or any unit level, is we don't have to tell the whole story, right? We can inherit and leverage the brand story. So what is happening that isn't, that is obviously kind of manifests itself in advancement? What's going on? What are those big stories that are being told to help connect, inspire, activate, and ultimately engage our alumni and donors, right? How do we make sure that we're using the big story machine, that it's something we've already talked about, so that we're really kind of can focus on, okay, then how do we connect people through those stories? If we're either driving an event strategy, driving a fundraising strategy, and we have to tell the whole story just to say, and wouldn't you like to be a part of this? That's an awful lot. Remember how noisy I was saying it is? It's an awful lot for that storytelling strategy to have to carry. If we can really be integrated with the overall brand story and have a clear connection from what we're about and kind of what we stand for and what we're asking people to do, it makes for a much cleaner segue. And ultimately, if we want people to support what we do, they need to care why we do it and who we do it for, right? So what is that thing that we're asking people, again, whether it's fundraising or a program, if that's the what's that why? It was already mentioned here, but like, what's the why are we even compelled to do that? And then who benefits, right? Obviously the institution benefits, but that's really not quite enough. People have to care about the who, they have to care about the people and see them. And the storytelling is the best way to do that. Help them see our people. It's an example I always like to use. This is a pretty great what. This is Disney Hall out in LA, and it's a magnificent building. And even if you're not going to a performance there, you want to be in it, right? It's really compelling. And this is a great what, right? Think about this as a program or a fundraising opportunity. And boy, look what we made. That's not the point, right? The point is the experience within it, right? This is the kind of the why of it. This is we built this building, not just to build a pretty building, but we built this building to facilitate these moments. But I'd push even one click further and say, that's not really even the point either. It's not just that we can put on these great performances and host these incredible events. It's to make that happen, right? It's to create a moment of delight. It's to create kind of these moments where people are so moved that they're kind of outside themselves. And if our storytelling can focus, if we're talking about the big building, the pretty building, it's got to come down here. What are the moments we can make happen? What are the stories we could tell about the human impact of what someone can do with us, through us? Again, through volunteerism, through participation in our program, through financial support. What is that human impact that they can help make happen? I love the mention before about the hero of the story. In some ways you want to give people on the other side of the conversation the idea and just the sense that they can make heroic effort here, right? There are things that we can't do without them, right? And it's not to say we're at a deficit, but if you look at all we've been able to do as an organization, as a school, as a college, in the university, there's something they can participate in that can make it even better. It can make it happen faster, it can make it happen broadly, and it can just bring these experiences up to a new level. And that's why I think that why, that was said before, is just so important. Always coming back to that why. What are we ultimately trying to achieve here? And understanding as part of that storytelling strategy, it's again, as we're picking stories and choosing how to tell them, what is the why behind each of them? Otherwise, it's just an interesting story. And we're not, unfortunately, we're not all just in the telling interesting stories business, right? We're in the telling interesting stories that move people. They move conversations, they move relationships. So why-driven storytelling and advancement ultimately is getting down to starting with, and not in the telling of the story, but really having a strong grounding in what do we stand for? You know, what do we stand for as this law school at this college university? You know, what's the thing, and not saying, you know, the brand differentiation that we use for student recruitment or whatever. It's really, what's the place we hold in our people? When we talk to our alumni, our donors, the people who invest and engage, what's the piece of them that they say, you know, you represent this to me. You represent this in my community. That's what I mean. You know, like that's the thing that you stand on as an organization. And then what do you seek? What's your something bigger? What are you getting after? What do you see in the environment right now that, again, as you're telling stories, there's kind of, it's leading to something. We're doing something special because we have to, because this is what we stand for, right? So it's kind of that logic of we stand for something, so we must do something, something bigger. And then why does it matter to our people? You know, do we know do they care about that? Right? Is that something, does that issue, does that cause, does that program, whatever, resonate with them as people we're engaging with? And then how can they be a part of it? That's that invitation piece, right? So that's, again, through the advancement lens, we've got to think about that call to action, that invite that lets people see themselves as part of that story. And I usually talk about that as tailwind, right? So we're inheriting all the tailwind of these bigger things about what we stand for, what we seek, why they care about it. That's the tailwind that allows us to kind of tell this story that's got a lot of momentum behind it. We're not trying to ask people, gosh, we're not really doing a whole heck of a lot. Like, can you help us out? No, it's, you know, we're going, we've got momentum, we've got trajectory, and you could be a part of it. And that's where the storytelling strategy can really help in terms of that call to action. So just an example here, and I'm sure there are many more in the room, but from a campaign storytelling, fundraising campaign storytelling standpoint, I thought Boston College has a nice flow that kind of follows that model, where they're in a big comprehensive campaign for the college writ large, soaring higher, and they're writing the next chapter of our history, right? So this is, I'm sure, everybody either has been, will be, or is in a campaign at some point that's part of the larger organization. So this is what's happening across the institution. And then here's where we start to look at, okay, as part of the storytelling, we're going to pull it through to the law school. And then, so what do you stand for? You know, as you look in the content strategy, as they start to kind of seed the story about, we've got this big campaign, it's going to do something grand. So what do you stand for as the law school, since you're a part of it? And service and scholarship, which you can make an argument, kind of anybody can talk about, but they've claimed that as part of, you know, part of their positioning for this campaign. What I liked about this is that as part of that, and this is, you can see, it's not a lot of words here, but the story they're telling about what they're going to stand for in this campaign is that, you know, their opportunities are built upon the Jesuit Catholic values of discernment and care for the whole person. So they've taken this kind of, we've got a big campaign, law is part of it, service and scholarship is part of it, but you, as an alum, as a donor prospect, know that this is about who we are, and that's different from other places. It's probably different from other places that you support, that you've been a part of. This is part of your experience. So they've figured, you know, they've zeroed right in on that value proposition for the folks who they're telling these campaign stories to. And then what do they seek? Well, they're looking at what's to come here, and they see that they've accomplished a whole lot. You know, the story they're telling is about, you know, momentum and trajectory, but they don't go so far as to say, you know, there are risks ahead, but they know, they've identified that there are some waters ahead. If we're following the sailing metaphor here, there are some waters ahead to say, we've got to step forward in terms of financial support for students. we've got to look at our academic programs because there are shifts in the market. There are shifts in the environment that will make it necessary for us to do something if we are to earn our next 100 years. So that, again, the story they're telling here is about kind of the place that has remarkable history, that has a clear identity, but we've got work to do to maintain our position, or retain our position and grow it. And why does it matter to them? Because you care about the legal profession, and they care about, lawyers who are trained to fiercely advocate for particular client views. Again, I'm not talking about long form storytelling here. This is, these are kind of pullouts, but they're using their people to tell the story about what they're called to do and why this campaign is necessary. And then how can you be a part of it? Well, they lay it out here. There's a campaign to be had. And I'm sure for all their prospects, they'll have very specific stories about what they can do to help. But they're saying that this campaign is necessary. Your support is necessary if you care about these things. So I just think this is a nice example of how a place, has taken this grand campaign story and really localized it and owned it all the way down to, and for our community, here's what we need to do. Having said all that, that's the scaffolding. This is Disney Hall again. This is the bones, the steel, and the concrete of how we tell our stories. What's really most important here is knowing who our people are, right? So we can spend a lot of time institutionally, organizationally, on this end of it, figuring out our storytelling strategy, what we want people to know, think, and do. But we've got to really make sure we understand them, right? Our stories only resonate if they resonate with the people on the other side of the conversation. What topics do they care about? What do they want to support? How do they want to help? Usually, organizations like, those of us who are doing the work that we do in this room here have a decent amount of information about profile, through a database. We might have a sense of kind of their academic profile, there's a study, their career, what's available by kind of a little bit of research. So what can we know about our people as we're thinking about the stories we want to tell and the things we're hoping they'll be a part of? And then how do those match up with our people? And do we need to tell every story to everybody, or are there ways to think about our audience in different ways? We can shape our storytelling strategy around, these are the people who probably care about this most. This probably resonates most with this segment of people. And the segment isn't about year, and it's not really about geography. It's more about kind of what their passion points are and what the topics that really resonate with them are. So how does what they care about, resonate with what you do, right? What you do as a college, as a school, and as a community? There'll be a lot of things they care about, want to support, and want to help that have nothing to do with what you do. So it's carving out from that noise, carving out that piece of what the area that you can really own. A couple of examples here. The Duke Law magazine and the online magazine is remarkable. It's just, if you're looking for digital storytelling done well, obviously this requires a lot of resources, but they do a great job of a number of things here, right? They're using digital really well. If you look through even this story, I think it's still on the homepage of the Duke Law magazine site. They're really using the technology to tell stories well, right? It's not just kind of blocks of content, but the pacing, the visuals they use, the way they pull out. These are kind of just going back to what was said earlier, just some best practices about how you use, digital platforms to do digital storytelling. Because there are some assets that we have that are just make for a great user experience. But so there's that part of it. There's also just, they've picked a topic that is timely, it's relevant. They have a play on it as Duke Law. Their readers, if it's the magazine for those who care about Duke Law, their readers are thinking about AI, because who's not right now, right? So this is a story that's compelling to the reader. It's important to Duke Law because it's a thing they're working on. So we're making a connection point around this is something we're doing. This is something you care about. Let's have a conversation through this kind of story, and I'm sure other pieces about, like, here's where we're going. And I would imagine there are also some opportunities to engage around it from an event standpoint, online programming, and I'm sure fundraising as well. NYU Law does a nice job in terms of, I'm sure there are others out there who do some, what we're calling lately intellectual engagement. The storytelling from the Duke piece is similar, but where can we pick a topic, pick an expert, an alum, a faculty member who have a point of view on a certain issue, and we can have a conversation about it, right? People benefit from being part of our community, this particular school or college's community, because they had an experience here and we're talking about topics people care about. That's important engagement where we can really express kind of our expertise and our play on the issues in a way that resonates with our community. And ultimately, as we think about inviting people in, effective storytelling isn't always, the last part of it isn't always come to this event, make this gift. Sometimes the effective storytelling is just there to help you earn the right to make an ask, right? If you jump from kind of, we don't talk at all, or we just blast stuff at you, and then all of a sudden we say, shouldn't you make your gift now? Wouldn't you like to come to this event? We're kind of missing something. And I really like to talk about it as earning it, earning the right to make that ask, that you've taken the time to find and tell those stories, to know who they are and what they care about. So ultimately you've earned that moment to say, wouldn't you like to come to this? Wouldn't you like to support this? Because it feels like a relationship that's grown over time, even just through storytelling. No one wants to feel like an ATM. and it's not enough just to rely on loyalty, on pride. A lot of times through annual giving, I think we see a little bit too much reliance on pride, on loyalty, on just pure competition. And, it's not quite enough. Or if it's enough, for some people, there probably means there's more they're willing to do if you earn some more of that right to ask a little bigger, ask a little deeper. So paying off, all of this is true for storytelling overall. And, in thinking about digital storytelling strategy, there are some things that make it different, but good storytelling is good storytelling, right? So how are we using the digital means at our disposal to do all the work that we've been talking about here? I think really it's putting the story at the core and then making sure we're just using our different platforms, whether you're, a big school or college or a small one, or you have a lot of people or not a lot of people. There are just a lot of, if you think about the stories at the hub, what are the assets at our disposal? Some of them are, our digital platforms, your website, which is really kind of the core here, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, but how are you using that story in your events? How are you using it do you have a newsletter or a magazine? Not everything, a lot of resources, but really this is for everybody.
Great. So we have a few questions in the chat for you. So if it's all right with you. Okay, so one of them kind of related to that hub picture that you showed, but many of us have small alumni pools, small staff. How do we efficiently try to communicate to those segmented interests with limited ability to create multiple narratives?
Yeah, so I think the slide that probably broke the presentation was we hit that point of, I don't know that I actually wouldn't say have different strategies for the different platforms, different strategies, but not creating specific content for each platform. I would say you can take one piece of content, one story, and then amplify it, right? Not everyone's going to spend a lot of time reading deeply on Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook, but they might discover it there. They might find it there, and then you could pull them back into the website. So I'd say just focus first on telling really great stories and then kind of promote them and feed them out, because people will show up in different places. And I wouldn't worry so much about saying we need to tell certain stories for Twitter because we have certain people there, or for LinkedIn or for Facebook. I think just amplifying the stories and the platforms that you have is a great way to, one, make sure your reach is extended, and two, no one has enough resources to tell a ton of stories. So making sure that you're just making the most of your efforts.
Yeah, the only thing I agree, and the only thing I'd add there is, I think if mostly young people are following you on Instagram, mostly You have your old audience on LinkedIn, whatever it may be. I think the actual words you put in the post can be framed differently to engage that audience, but the big lift, the bigger content that's going to be on your website can be the same. So that's kind of how we approach it, is just framing those hooks a little differently, but the big content is the same.
And Mara and Charlie, thank you both for dedicating your time to us today. I know there's a ton of questions from the 150 people that we have watching today. There was somebody who messaged me directly, actually, and was sort of chuckling a bit because, of course, attorneys like to say a lot of things and a lot of words, and we love them for that. But when you go and look at the analytics, as you kind of alluded to, like, wow, there's no way they could have read this 3-column newspaper story, so to speak, in 48 seconds. So I think you bring up such important points about how to make it consumable for all of our different audiences. Okay,
Heather,
there was
can I add
one
one
more.
other point there? I think the analytics are great in terms of helping us figure exactly that this thing that we know would actually take 4 minutes to read, they've read for 16 seconds. So how do we shape the content to meet the appetite, right? Don't fill the plate too much if we know they can only eat a little. The other thing is use the analytics to help storytelling strategy, but also help, those are people, right? The metrics are people. And I think it's another kind of good just mental tip to think about, the stories that people are reading help us understand our constituency better. And if we really care about something and really want people to know it and they're not reading it, it might not be because we're not hitting them enough, or we need to also tell it somewhere else. It might mean they don't actually care as much as we think they do. So it could, we might test a little bit or something, but metrics are actually, feedback, and if you're speaking into the ether, that might mean that you need to tell some different stories.
Thank you so much. Okay, I found the second question, and I know there's a third in the Q&A. This was kind of related to the Venn diagram that you were showing. And Mara, I'm sure you have good feedback on this too. How do you handle saying no to important constituents when they want a story and it does not apply to your strategic plan or to the questions that you're asking?
Mary, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, definitely. I joke often that politely declining is like my profession, right? I think that if you have really clear goals, it's very easy to do this. I found most people are extremely receptive if you can say, this is our goal, this is why, and here's kind of why this doesn't fit. Folks will be receptive. If you don't have that strategy and you're just kind of like, nah, not into this, it's a lot harder to say no. I'd be lying if I said we didn't do stories that don't always fit with our goals, because what we call a SWAT situation, someone with a title wants it, that happens, right? And I think that all happens to all of us, it's going to. But the clearer the goals you have are, the easier it is to decline. And we often also like to do what we call no but. So for that SNL example, no, we're not going to write a story for the IU newsroom about this, but social media is happy to post a congratulations on their story, right? And then you at least don't feel like you're just shutting folks down. You're giving them, that's a better audience because young people who know him are there. So those are kind of my 2 tips for that. But we're not always successful.
I would just add, that's awesome, and I love the SWAT thing. Sometimes just a little inventory of, here are all the outlets that we have access to, the website, if there's a magazine or a newsletter or whatever. Here's our audience, here's the purpose, and here are the kind of stories that fit in. And using that with colleagues around to say, hey, it's going to be most helpful to hear these stories for this purpose. And then also knowing, again, in fundraising, a lot of times it's understanding why they're trying to tell the story, why it needs to go in the magazine or on the website or through PR. It's actually stewardship and helping people. That's the purpose of it. So helping people understand that's probably not the best way to steward the donor. we can see if there's a story we could tell around that gift, but let's think about some really one-to-one things that we could do to help them make them feel special about the gift. That'll be way more powerful. Sometimes that horse has way left the barn, back to the SWAT thing, but it's education. So I think helping people understand, what tools you and they have at their disposal to either promote or steward or, just tell stories about what's going on there.
Yeah, and I would say I've found the more we educate people about our goals, the less often we're getting pitch stories that don't align with what our goals are, right? So, or they're coming to us framing a certain story in a way they know aligns with our goals. So it hopefully can be a little bit of a ripping a Band-Aid off, right? You're doing that education up front, and then they learn themselves, and you're not having to say no as much.
Okay, we have another question specific to giving days that I received a message about. So a lot of us, have to be part of giving days, but oftentimes the messaging is very big and broad about the university, and then what our goals or strategies are as the law school are quite different. So the question was basically, how do you go with the flow? You've kind of answered this to an extent, and participate, but still stay true to, what your why and your strategy is.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to drop in some of the slides I didn't get to. We're actually riffing off of Cornell's Giving Day, because they do some really fun things. Part of it, I think, is, Giving Days have so much, use whatever word, promotion, bluster. They have gravitational force around them. Part of it is the personality. How do you want to show up as law during the Giving Day? Because the tone might actually feel a little bit different from the overall institution. So that's one. What's the attitude? What's the kind of the tone again of communications? Do you have the ability to throttle a little bit and control for how much people are getting? Are they going to get everything? Will they just get things from you? I think that's part of it. How much negotiation room do you have in that, especially with dual degree folks? And then the other part is just how much, two things. One, how does it fit into the overall conversation that you're having with folks? Just the rhythm of communications that are in programming. And then all of a sudden, if Giving Day just shows up and kicks the door in, it'll feel weird. So, again, how does it fit into your overall communication and programming for the year? And then not every school, college unit experiences a Giving Day's impact the same, where for undergrad alum, it might feel like the big bump. At the law level, it might be nice. And again, this depends on the place. It might be nice, but there are other opportunities that resonate more. I think having those conversations if there's a central team driving it, just making sure that there's a point of view on the table about, of course, we want to be a part of this institution-wide effort, but let's just right size expectations and volume around where it fits in with the conversation.
Yeah, and I would just echo that, really understanding if there is a central office that's running this, understanding who they're talking to and what they're saying, and if there is something that's missing, filling that gap, but also making sure they're understanding your goals and how those can align is helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of our folks that work in this space in law feel caught in the middle because they know they have to go with the flow. As you said, they don't have much negotiation room, but they keep shouting like, wait, our grads don't wear that color robes. Like that can clearly not be us. So stop sending those out,
Yeah.
But it's hard because, as you said, for the undergrad, it's often a huge bump.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's just different. And I think, again, each organization, each institution tends to be a little bit different in how well they understand that, especially law. I mean, law is a lot of times culturally, kind of conversation wise, feels like a different tone. And like I said, even colors, just the people might not resonate with the mascot running around campus. They don't know what it is. They might not have spent a whole lot of time on campus. So, or even that campus. So I think helping those driving communication essentially understand that we've got folks in the room that we're communicating with who might have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. Okay, I think there's one more question from Jamie, and then we're going to wrap it up. So go ahead, Jamie.
Thanks, Heather, and thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Mara. I'm assuming, some of our groups have international populations, in addition to the domestic. Vast majority are domestic populations. If we're segmenting out the international audiences, I'm wondering if you have any best practices or lessons learned from either of your areas on communicating with them, and what we might take away from today's talk on that topic.
Mary, you want to start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm fortunate that I've got colleagues and our vice president for international affairs who recruit and help kind of retain our international students, and we rely heavily on them. But I know those folks are communicating with a lot of those groups through WeChat, just like platforms that are more popular internationally than here. And also I would say something that we prioritize is keeping tabs on, what's happening internationally and being sensitive to, what may be happening in their realm of the world and how that may be impacting their lives, and being proactive about making sure they have the resources or know about the resources that can help them here from the university. I'm trying to think. Also, just making sure that we center international stories so they don't feel like, you're coming to the middle of the country in Indiana. Maybe not everyone is expecting that there is a large international student population, or that we teach more foreign languages than any other university in the country. So making sure that we're telling the stories that portray us as a global university, even though that may be not the first thing you see. I hope that answers that question. I don't do a ton of direct communication to international students, so I might not have all the info to answer that question.
I would just add, especially for places that don't have, the ability to create like many cuts of communications, making sure that for those who might be international, that they don't feel left out, right? That if there's programming happening that it would take them 15 hours to get to, make sure they're programming that might take them an hour, even if it's online, just again, to kind of recognizing where they are and not making really highlighting how far away they are. The storytelling strategy, there should be stories that resonate with everybody, but not kind of making them feel excluded, by just distance through kind of, there are all these opportunities I'd love for you to be a part of. It's physically impossible.
Yeah. And we're lucky here in Indiana University. We have, when we're talking about alumni, we have global gateway offices throughout the world. I forget how many we have at this point, but they're wonderful resources to engage alumni in those areas and also recruit prospective students. And we tap into those networks to figure out what's going on in those regions, often from a storytelling capacity.
Well, Charlie and Mara, thank you so much again for being here today. So many great nuggets of information. I'm sure you'll be hearing from our section with more questions.
We've got a good panel program to close out today with some information about meaningful alumni participation pathways. I am going to introduce Vanessa and Lexi, who are two colleagues. Vanessa is the Director of Alumni Engagement at the Indiana University College of Arts and Sciences. She's going to kick us off with a session demonstrating how they've implemented the integrated advancement model that Chris introduced to us earlier on today. And then that's going to be followed up with Lexi from the University of Utah, Quinney College of Law. So Vanessa, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamie. I really appreciate the opportunity. And thank you again for joining us. I know it's been a long day and I truly appreciate your time. So let's go ahead and jump in. So I'm here to talk about today how we're implementing our interpretation of the ABCD Plus approach that Chris Marshall discussed in an earlier session today. This model was introduced to our team at a conference hosted by our Alumni Association last fall. Although we have been working to develop synergies across our advancement team, we have faced challenges in identifying a clear, unified path forward. A common issue for those of us in functional roles, including communications, engagement, and donor relations, is demonstrating the direct impact of our work on the donor pipeline. This strategy, however, has provided clarity and direction in allowing us to align our efforts more effectively. What we've come to understand is that engagement needs to be intentional, beginning with a clear end goal in mind, which, for all of us, I recognize is advancing philanthropy. Effective engagement means asking who are our highest value audiences. What you see on your screen is our initial version of this approach, and I did want to reiterate a statement that Chris made earlier today. This is for our own edification, and it is used for in-house purposes only. Note we did select to focus on cumulative and lifetime giving. Our raw data is in Excel. It's not in a Tableau report or another database that is managed by the foundation. So we have the ability to sort in real time outright giving versus planned gifts. Also, we've redefined the D category to identify a distinct group we now refer to as our college citizens. These are individuals who are deeply engaged. By applying this classification across all segments, we've gained clear insights into how different categories of constituents interact with us, and we aim to strategically grow and nurture this audience in the future. So, how did we get here? First, we sought buy-in from our entire team and outlined a clear approach for developing a version of this model that will ensure alignment with upcoming campaign priorities. In the process, we acknowledge the limitations of our data, and for us, this includes but is not limited to valid personal data on our constituents. So, for example, we only have 40% of alumni emails on file, and unfortunately, current professional statistics are even lower. The inability to capture comprehensive communication metrics like open and click-through rates, and then event participation, volunteerism, and other forms of engagement are not always captured or easily reportable by our systems, unlike donations. Despite these gaps, we utilize the available data, combining a comprehensive alumni and non-alumni donor research list with engagement statistics to develop the insights needed for this approach. To maximize internal resources, we enlisted our summer intern to organize and analyze the data. So we're just at the beginning stages here. And so these are a few ways we are implementing this approach. So I did want to point out that audience segmentation is something we have engaged in for a very long time, but this has given us a new way of thinking about our segmentations as well. So I also wanted to point out a couple of immediate impacts that we have seen. Initially, each of the functional areas of our office, so again, communications, engagement, and donor relations, was tasked with generating gift leads for fiscal year 25. This project allowed us to significantly exceed expectations with approximately 200 leads identified to date. Additionally, I did want to clarify that DXO stands for Digital Engagement Officer, which is a position through the IU Foundation. I can liken it to an individual giving officer. Similar to CLE events, we host lifelong learning programming, mainly online, for our alumni and friends here in the college. I always share a prospected list with our team, our dean, and campus colleagues before each event. I plan to include a column that references the ABCD Plus categories to help colleagues quickly identify and understand the audience makeup. We are not only thinking about how to cultivate and steward our college citizens is kind of what I've outlined here in terms of key programming and volunteer opportunities, but we're also using this information to help with donor retention efforts as well. While we're still in the learning phase and haven't set formal goals or metrics around this approach yet, we aim to refine the strategy over time and clarify measurable outcomes in the coming years. However, the model is helping us envision our future. So there was a couple of things I wanted to point out here. So the strategic alumni journey, there is a function within Salesforce that creates these journey pathways for engagers with the Salesforce platform. We started testing a journey with our young alumni population before adopting this approach. The initial purpose was to analyze the way they were engaging with their content so we could adjust methodology based on their behavior moving forward. Because of this model, we're now reconsidering the target audiences for this effort, given what we're learning. Additionally, the engagement touch points, I wanted to give you an example from earlier today, actually, about how we're leveraging this. We recently developed an impact report that is talking about the role of philanthropy in our school. It was sent to the A, Bs, and a portion of the C segments that was outlined earlier. What we discussed earlier today is the digital format of this is what is the type of language we want to use when sending this content to the remaining Cs and the C minuses. How do we want to articulate the impact to our D pluses and helping them think about the possibility of moving into that C category? So it's really helping us to think strategically and understand who those audiences are. Not only today, but in the future, so we can refine that. The other thing that I wanted to point out as well is capturing that right data. So one of the challenges that we face really in this strategy is a lack of understanding relating to click-throughs and open rates. And so as we refine our path forward, building partnerships and support so we can collect that data moving forward and integrating that into our plan, hopefully will illuminate broader information about this effort. Now, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge resource limitations. I recognize that we're all being asked to do more with less. And so how do we balance ambition with pragmatism? So one of the easy ways that we are finding that this approach is working for us is passing along either leads to the DXOs or updating our gift team about prospect behavior. So is someone in the A category asking a question during an event? Are they sending us an email following the receipt of a communication, etc.? I'm also sending personal thank yous to the college citizen group following events. Additionally, we're trying to serve as an inspiration hub for our faculty and staff partners by using this information to help inspire best practices by them. So we're really excited about the implementation and really look forward to hearing your questions about how we're utilizing this approach. So with that, I would like to thank you again for your time and attention, and I'll hand it over to Lexi.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here speaking to a really great group of us in AALS. We thought for this panel, it would be nice if the panelists shared a bit about how our development alumni relationships are kind of put together. And that way we can, talk about the various ways that our teams are configured, how we measure impact, and how we measure our own efficacy. So I'll tell you a little bit about me and my team. My name is Lexi Kite. I'm at the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. I have been here for almost 2 years, but prior to that, I, like Vanessa, was in a College of Arts and Social Sciences. I was in the College of Humanities here at the University of Utah for 15 years doing development while I was doing my master's and PhD. Kind of fell into it backwards. I have found since being at the College of Law that It is much easier to build community at the College of Law because it is already built in. This is a group of alums who know each other, who took the same classes together, who know their professors, know the name of their dean. They have this shared language, they take the same tests. So that sense of community is already built in for law schools. I think that is so incredibly valuable. I've also found that from a fundraising perspective, it makes making an ask a little bit more natural when you can demonstrate the vast resources it takes to be able to go to law school. They all had to pay their tuition or received scholarships and might feel like they want to pay it forward. They understand the costs associated with really integrating yourself into the law school. So I'm very happy to be at the College of Law. Let me tell you about my team. So I'm the Senior Director of Development and Alumni Relations. So I take a very integrated advancement approach to everything related to alumni relations, related to our work with marketing and communication, all the events we do, because for me, my bottom line is always going to be the fundraising efforts. It's going to be the money we bring in, because that's how I am evaluated. I have a dual report role where I am reporting to the institutional advancement team, and I'm also reporting to my dean. So I have two groups and constituencies that I need to make happy, but I'm housed in the College of Law. That's where my office and my team's office is. So I oversee a team of 4. Our team has changed rapidly in even just the last few months. So we're configured very differently than we were when I got to the College of Law a couple years ago. But right now we have an amazing team of 4. So we have a major gifts officer who will be primarily frontline fundraising, but has also assumed, alumni relations responsibilities throughout. We have a development officer, same frontline fundraiser, and has assumed development responsibilities and stewardship responsibilities, which is so central to everything we do. We have a development specialist who is also handling all the details of all of these things, and a grants manager that helps with a bunch of our OSP grants, Office of Sponsored Projects, and just private and family foundation grants. I told you I take an integrated advancement approach to everything we do because that is how I am evaluated. But I also think that for all of us, we can probably agree that it makes a lot of sense to be able to think about the return on our investment with these alums and our limited budgets we have. And so how do we make sure how we're engaging with our alums, how we're communicating to them, the events we're inviting them to? How do we make sure that we are always demonstrating the impact of donor support? How do we make sure they understand that their peers are giving, and who are their peers that are giving, and what is the impact they're making on the law school? How do we help them to understand that with more giving, with more private donor support, we can do more, and that increases the value of their degree? I think that, we can demonstrate things like being able to rise through the rankings and that it costs actual, dollars to be able to do that. That's helpful. And that obviously we can talk to our alums about how that definitely increases the value of their degree. But in other ways, how do we help them see the ripple effects of even small gifts on the law school and beyond, on the legal field more broadly, on our communities? So I wanted to talk about a few ways that we, from an alumni relations perspective, are trying to integrate advancement into what we're doing to help people see that philanthropy is so important while we're trying to engage with them. So I thought I would take just a couple of minutes to talk about a few highlights for us in terms of alumni relations. And after that, I believe we have one more panelist, and then we'll do a Q&A where we can all just discuss what works, what doesn't work. We'd love to hear from you guys in the chat about this and just be able to talk a little bit about, how to kind of navigate the sometimes complex world of alumni relations and development and how they work together. So a few things we've been doing since I got to the College of Law. We've had a Utah Law Alumni Awards, a variation of it for a long time. We treat it as our reunion. It's in the spring every year in April. It's a chance for people to come back and connect and all of that. But when I got to the college a couple years ago, I decided it might make more sense to kind of like beef up the event and do what we can to make this our signature event, bringing our alumni back. And how could we do a better job of getting them here and funding it all? Because it is an extremely expensive event. So we did a couple of things. For the awards, we have now, the last 2 years, we have now been doing sponsorships for the event. And this is with law firms and other law organizations like the courts or, legal aid type of things. So we have been able to raise upwards a little more than $30,000 per year in sponsorships for the event, which allows us to sponsor our graduating 3Ls to come to the event. And so the way that our alumni awards are structured, it's in our College of Law building. And we start out in the moot court auditorium with like a glitzy awards show. And, our dean is wearing sequins, and we have 6 alumni awards that are like our most prestigious awards for the year. And we have also included the graduating 3Ls to give out their student awards, their most, prestigious awards at that event. Then afterward, we move out to the patio and we do a champagne toast where the Young Alumni Association president welcomes the graduating class of 3Ls as the newest group of alums. And we get to celebrate them as joining, this community. The sponsorships we have done have allowed us to get more firms, 16 firms this last year, into the building, mingling with our students and their peers. That brings our alums in because the firms are prioritizing getting their Utah Law alumni back to us. It's been really successful, and it's been a great way to just build that sense of community, raise some money along with it through table sponsorships, and identifying the impact of people's giving through, some of the people that receive our awards are some of our big donors that are making a huge impact. And so it's a cool opportunity to be able to integrate advancement into the alumni relations work we're doing. Another way that we have recently started doing this is through the development of our Utah Law Golden Gavel Society. My major gift, or my development officer, Violet Ma, this was her creation. So last year was the first year of establishing this Golden Gavel Society. It is for all alums who graduated more than 50 years ago from the College of Law. And we had a live event that was right before the Utah Law Alumni Awards. So if people were coming in for the awards, they were also here for the Golden Gavel event. And it was an in-person event for people to get together that hadn't seen each other in many, many years. We had a couple of keynote speakers, and then we had an open mic that allowed people to just share their memories of law school, the impact of their education on their careers, and what they've been up to since. We had a 103-year-old man show up, our oldest alum, graduated in the 40s. He sang a song to us. He had everybody sing along with him. It was so fun. It was such a great way to build community among an audience that are also our donors. If we're being honest, those are our major gift donors. Those are our principal gift donors. Those are, people that we really want to engage with in a meaningful way. And that was the golden age of going to school, where they knew each other and loved each other and want to be in touch, even more so than recent graduating classes. So the Golden Gavel Society, they were inducted into the society with a certificate. They did a grip and grin handshake with the dean on their way in. They received these little golden gavel pins. Other perks involved in it are that we're doing a live event every spring along with the alumni awards. We have our Golden Gavel event, and then every fall we're doing a virtual event, so even more people can attend that couldn't fly in or couldn't travel for the event. That will be similar, a State of the Union address from the dean. We will do some highlights of what their peers have been up to, a keynote speaker, and open mic on Zoom that we're still trying to navigate as the conference the people hosting this conference have had to do as well. I don't envy you. We'll be doing that this fall. Along with that, the last few years have not been printing our alumni magazine. It's been just digital. And we decided that a perk for the Golden Gavel Society would be a printed copy of like a yearly roundup of the alumni magazine that features stories from their generation, from Golden Gavel Society members, as well as some other stories. So they get a printed copy of that. They get invited to other things, but we just wanted some perks that I'm sure many of you are doing something similar. But we found this to be a really nice way to engage with this group of alums that They want to be involved with the school. They are honored to receive an email to, meet with the dean and the development director. It's a really wonderful group. So that has been a fun thing we are doing lately and constantly conceiving of new ideas for. We also, like many of you, we get on the road. Our dean, she wants to be out and about, and we are traveling, and she is traveling. So we do these SJQ on the road events across the US. We did more than 10 last year in every key city where we have a good group of alums. Those have been really fun. Some of them are co-hosted by board members that are in DC or New York or LA, wherever we might be. That's been a great way just to engage with people. We give them a fast facts flyer of what's going on in the college so they can see how much is tuition these days? How much are we awarding in scholarships? Who is the dean? They don't always know. Kind of some highlights and infographics that just keep them apprised of what's going on at the college. Beyond that, we also partner with our communications and marketing team to make sure that we are featuring the stories of our donors, of amazing students who have been impacted by scholarships. We want to demonstrate the impact of what giving does for the school. So in every way, when we're meeting at least monthly with the marketing and communication team, we're thinking about how to integrate these advancement ideas into everything we're doing and what we're posting on social media, the events that we're planning. I believe everybody is working on that in some way, whether you're just an alumni relations director or beyond. But I hope that gives you a little sense of what we're doing at the University of Utah. And I'd love to hear your questions and engage with everybody on what works and what doesn't.
Thank you, Lexi. And yes, we did have a third panelist for today, but due to her personal issue, she is not able to join us. So I'll go ahead and have Vanessa come back on with her camera, and Heather's going to join us as well. We're going to treat this as kind of an open forum conversation-like opportunity now to address questions with you all. As Heather just posted into the chat, please do let us know what questions you have for the panelists today. We've got a couple to get us kickstarted. Vanessa, we'll start with you because I think there's a good question about how you developed your ABCD list. Someone asked, is it generated automatically by some program or software? I think you mentioned at some point you have an Excel document with all kinds of data in it that you can manipulate it any which way you want to. And I think Chris didn't really cover this. Can you talk a little bit about how you generated that list?
Yeah, so we have a monthly alumni and non-alumni donor report we receive from our foundation each month for research purposes, etc. And so really what we did is we divided that list and categorized it based on what we agreed as a team were our values and our priorities. In addition to that, our Alumni Association has been tracking engagement data. And so we were able to download that information separately and pull together a VLOOKUP, which is an Excel formula, and cross-match that against all of the categories. And so that's how we define the college citizens and the other buckets that were non-donors, because that was one of the challenges is how do you identify someone who is engaged but is not giving? And so it took a little time, but it wasn't anything unmanageable. And again, we leveraged our summer intern. And so Bailey did a great job in helping us pull that information together.
Yeah, having that additional hand, I'm sure was helpful. I like the fact that this college citizen title that you've created. I really like that because I've found myself wondering in all of these conversations that I've had about integrated advancement over the last year here at Indiana University about what do we do with our younger alumni that have such high debt loads they can't give at a level like we might classify in that A, B, or C category. And we can still classify them in this engaged citizen category that you guys have created.
Yep. Absolutely. And thinking about, okay, how do we create a consistent experience so then that way, when their journey allows them to start thinking about and considering their philanthropic priorities, hopefully, we'll be at, in that top 3.
Yeah, that's great. Lexi, I don't think I'm speaking alone here, my heart skipped a couple beats when you said you gave alumni an open mic, especially
Yeah.
alumni from older generations.
Yeah.
I've been burnt quite a few times with my School of Medicine alumni when I used to work over in that venue, of them getting up and a half an hour later, they're finally done.
Totally. Mhm.
We did have a question for you about your events that you talked about, Lexi. Let me see if I can find it here. You talked about having a good group of alums. They're wondering if you can define what you meant by good.
Mhm.
And then they're also wondering, because you talked about doing so many national events, and I think those are important. People are asking about what you do to ensure success and attendance at those programs, because I think a lot of us have experienced events where we have people register and just don't show up,
I know.
which can be
50%.
incredibly frustrating. Yes, and that's isn't it amazing how that tends to be the percentage on almost all of our
Yes.
events? Yeah. Can you maybe address those 2 points?
Yeah, I can address all of it. First of all,
Okay.
open mic, super scary. It was
Yeah,
a risk.
yeah.
And you know what? It worked. It turns out that in person, I gently but forcefully, before the open mic, said, we have so many of you who want to share your memories. We're going to limit everybody's memories to 2 minutes so we can make sure to hear from all of you. We also had our alumni awards beginning after this event, and we had to run and we had to pull the dean. So it was very helpful to let them know that they had 2 minutes, and they stuck to it. It worked out really well. What I'm nervous about is the Zoom open mic, which will happen on October 23rd. What we'll do is have everybody auto muted, and then they'll have to like raise their hands, and we'll have to show them how to do that, through the Zoom. Yeah, we'll see.
So the mute button on Zoom is kind of like the hook on stage.
Yeah,
Mute
it is.
them and gently pull them off.
Oh, in the kindest possible way. But yeah, we'll see. Wish us luck. We're
luck.
always, I think it all depends on your dean, but we have a dean who is really into throwing out ideas and seeing what works, and then evaluating, like, are we on to the next thing? Do we need to do something differently? And that's so helpful for me. Not all deans and leaders are like that. And so we are able to try a lot of stuff out. And that brings me to the next question of traveling and doing events, which, my bottom line is fundraising, but I'm also then charged with planning and hosting events in 10 cities across the US, which was wildly expensive. So we tried this a few different ways. In some places, we would have a firm host us. The firm would thankfully pay for light appetizers and some drinks. A good group of alums, I'd say if we get 10 alums in LA, DC, New York, San Francisco, Boise, Vegas, we're doing good. We got 10 at all of them. No, not Boise. Boise, we're going to go back to every couple years. It wasn't a solid group of alums. And the legwork, it's a heavy lift. I was personally emailing a ton of people in every place, just trying to lay the groundwork for where should we be coming back? Where are the groups of alums most engaged? So after this blitz of at least 10 events across the country, I spoke with our dean about letting that be kind of the test for whether we go back every year, or if it's an every couple years thing, if it's a thing where we're keeping in touch with people via email, or when admissions is out there or career development is traveling, we can, tag a couple of our most engaged alums there. So for, Boise, it wasn't super successful. We were begging people to attend. There just weren't that many people there. They live 50 miles away. That's one thing. I think we can all understand that. But I didn't count it as a failure. I count it as a way to qualify a bunch of alums as either excited to be engaged, willing to be engaged, or, off the map completely. It is also, the legwork involved in just finding new emails for people that are leaving their firms constantly. It is massive. Yeah. And you don't want the development director to be doing that work. And I was, so now that I have a bigger team that can help do that legwork, I think that will be helpful. I know so many of us are looking for emails. We're messaging.
I've recently paid for the upgraded subscription to LinkedIn so I can do more in-mails every month to people.
Oh, and do you find that is useful? Is that a good investment?
I think most people respond to my in-mail requests. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna have to
when they're on there. The problem is a lot of our older generations aren't on LinkedIn, or they don't have a profile picture. If they don't have a profile picture, I'm probably not going to hear back from them.
Yes.
but I have found that LinkedIn is helpful. When you go to some of these places, are you using alumni firms to host you? What are you looking at for venues?
Yes. So we've had a broad range. We've done Mayor Brown in New York, Ballard Spar in DC. You know, we've done a bit of that where it even feels a little uncomfortable to ask the firm to pay for catering. And so when it comes up naturally, when they're like, when we have a board member who is there, of course, you know, they'll pay. Other times we have had to pay, you know, $1,500 for light appetizers and drinks. And it feels maybe a little too expensive. The ROI might not be there, but it was worth a shot. You know, it really depends on your dean and your budget and what, you know, can be allowed. In other places, when we were in DC in May, we, just rented a part of a bar and just had everybody in, and we had some, you know, buffet appetizers and drinks on tab. And that was fun. It was more casual. So it depends on your alumni group there. I will often do an alumni event, but then reach out to top prospects for individual visits. Of course, they're still invited to the event, but like all of us, I think we're doing the one-on-one visits with the, you know, higher level prospects. And then it's a more casual environment because it's our younger alums. It's people that really want to network and, you know, don't want one-on-one time with the dean as much. So we've across the board done all sorts of events. Firms have been very helpful and useful, but I find in major cities, it is hard to vet people to get up to the right floor for, you know, Ballard Spar, who you have to have your ID on you. And the dean didn't have her ID on her. And that really complicated things for us.
Sure did. Vanessa, I want to talk about events with you a little bit in your ABCD program that you're developing. Have you and the team at the College of Arts and Sciences begun to uncover some new opportunities to engage folks across the spectrum of your ABCD program?
Yeah, so we're definitely looking into that and thinking about, so for instance, we recently gained access to the IU auditorium suite. And so we were thinking about, all right, taking a look at the A's and B's, all right, who locally who fit within that category may be good, you know, this could be a good stewardship, this could be a good engagement, or is there someone from that C bucket that this might help elevate them to that B category. So it's thinking strategically around what does that look like and what does that mean? Like I said, we're still very new into this. And so check back in with me in a year and I'm sure that I'll have a full slate of ideas as it relates to programming.
Great.
I'll just jump in and say there's a couple questions in the chat, Jamie. I copied and pasted them from the Q&A if you'd like to ask our great panelists.
Yeah, so this is a good one. Lexi, you talked a little bit about your alumni awards process, and it looks like some of our group wants to know more about that. How are your recipients chosen for your awards? Was the awards ceremony that you spoke about, was that a new idea or a refresh of an existing idea? Talk a little bit maybe about how you've reframed that. So yeah, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah. And I'd be curious about, you know, just in the chat, if people also want to share, are you doing a full alumni reunion weekend? Are you doing a similar alumni awards event? Are they in conjunction with each other? I think we'd all be curious to know how that's working out. I know for us, the award winners are chosen. We have nomination forms on our website that we push out via email in the fall. So right now, those are being pushed out for our Young Alumni Awards and our Distinguished Alumni Awards. We'll gather those nominations, but we also internally have some ideas of people that, you know, we would like to receive awards. And so I will put all of those together with their bios and present them to the executive committee of our alumni board for vote. And we don't bring it to the rest of the board. It's at the discretion of the dean, but she would like to have some buy-in from the chair-elect and the, you know, vice chair and the chair. So that's how we've done the awards. They have been very well received, I think. We end up getting the people that I want to see, you know, receiving the awards. I think that we're all kind of in agreement on who it ends up being. So that's helpful. The event itself is kind of a refresh of an event that was super stale and had very few people attending before a couple years ago. And so we wanted to just do something new and different. And so The first year, the new and different was table sponsors, getting a lot more people in the room. We were still doing a seated dinner, but instead of doing our award winners getting up and having to, speak on the mic, we pre-recorded their acceptance speeches so that we could control for time. That was very helpful. The problem was we filled the room to capacity, beyond capacity, and that's a good problem to have. But we rolled one more table in there, and it was one table too many. So the next year we decided maybe we want to mix it up a little bit more, and we don't want to do a seated dinner where sponsors only get to meet like the 4 students that we put at their table. And instead, we do this kind of glitzy awards show that's 45 minutes long in the moot court room, in the auditorium. And then we move throughout the building for food stations all throughout the building for karaoke on the bottom floor, stuff like that. So people like it.
Yeah, and it's a different take on it. That's an interesting idea. There was a couple responses in here to your question about how they're handling it. A lot of homecoming, family weekend, dual degree folks. At Wake Forest, Arkansas does theirs along with a reunion. Yeah, so here
does a full alumni week. Yeah.
Here at McKinney, we have instituted a donor recognition dinner. Last year was our first year doing that. We're actually adding the awards component to it this year as well. So we're going to have an opportunity for donors to meet scholarship recipients, as well as the association to recognize award recipients. So that's a different take on the program here. We've got about maybe 5 minutes left in the program today. There was one other question in here about faculty. Let me see if I can find it. Lots of good stuff in here since we've asked the question. Yeah, here we go. And maybe this is a question for both of you, Lexi and Vanessa, about how you engage faculty in meaningful development engagement opportunities. Some examples: speaking in class, lunch and learn sessions. And have you had any pushback from faculty? So we'll toss it to both of you to see what you might have to say about faculty engagement.
Vanessa, how are you working with faculty?
Yeah, so we work very closely with our faculty, and actually we've been incredibly fortunate. Our dean was a faculty member for 29 years before he stepped into his current role. And so he really understands the structure, has developed relationships. And so they play a critical component in the work that we do. We don't host Spirit, Pride, and Tradition events. We really lean into lifelong learning and opportunities there. There was a culture about 10 years ago and prior that would push back. We are now seeing energy and excitement anytime we're meeting with departments and programs and our faculty. What can we do? How can we increase our alumni information? We hosted an event with an incredible faculty member. The donors that fund his center were on the online, and he personally thanked them. The dean personally thanked them. It was just such an incredible opportunity. And so any way that you can tap into that is a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, you sound like the pro at that. I'm admittedly not the pro at engaging faculty in what we're doing. Some of it depends on how engaged the faculty want to be, but I think others, the 100+ others on this call, would probably have better ideas than I do for how to really engage with faculty and alums.
And I'll just add, sometimes it happens in reverse, where you find out after the fact, right, that this person has been invited to that class, and you're like, wait, I would have had some things that I could have, given them, or a thank you note, or, whatever the case may be. So do you have any strategies in that regard where you ask faculty to report in what they've done?
So we're creating an advancement hub that faculty and staff can use to report and then also receive, like you said, some swag, or having a conversation about, is there an opportunity for us to host them to lunch, etc. I think that there's all kinds of opportunities. This is definitely an issue that we really struggle with. We've identified some key departments that we're working closely with to help strategize the application of it long term. And so, yes, that is an incredible area of frustration for me personally. But how do we build champions? How do we build communities with trust? So I think that's for me, what I've learned it works best.
One of the keys that
And
we
then-
have here, I'm sorry, Heather, one of the keys we have here at Indiana University in that department of one, right? We don't have smaller departments like the college might have, but when a faculty member hosts an alumnus in their classroom, the alumnus needs to park somewhere. So they have to email into the dean's office to get the parking code for the alumnus. And we've arranged to have the administrative assistant in that office now report back to us in alumni relations when a faculty member hosts an alumnus or a guest, because we're tracking volunteerism. We will track that. Last year, we know here at the McKinney School of Law, just from the numbers reported to us, we had over 400 volunteers contribute over 1,500 hours of service, whether that be in the classroom, in a panel in front of the Black Student Law Association, or a judge or a brief grader for moot court, for example. So we've been able to really begin capturing what I called the baseline last year. We'll hopefully be able to add on to that this year and in future years.
Wow.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've seen it as simple as, a Google form of who's coming to class, or, a monthly email that goes out that's scheduled that says, just let us know who you're inviting so that we could thank them, something of that regard.
All right, well, we are just shy of 4:45, so I want to thank Vanessa and thank Lexi for your knowledge and expertise today. I want to thank Heather for serving as co-chair for this whole thing, along with me. Hopefully, we've all benefited today from the content that was shared with us during the virtual conference. Meredith, I see your comment in the chat about commencement, and I will just throw out there that I chair our commencement here at the McKinney School of Law, and I'd be happy to chat with you about what we do here. So feel free to reach out to me, and we can have a chit chat about what we do there. I think at this point, Heather, I'll turn it over to you for final comments about next steps.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for the many, many people who have been with us here today. And hopefully you feel like you are not alone and you found some inspiration and some folks out there that you can reach out to with your questions or ideas. We have a very dynamic section and a lot of great people out there who want to help you. So I just want to give a plug for our section survey that Marianne also put in the chart that's come out. It takes just a few minutes. Please add your feedback and just make sure that your school is included in the aggregate data that we'll be putting together. And of course, we hope to see as many of you as can attend in January. We have some great presentations and a little sightseeing too, a little trip to Sausalito. I'm particularly excited about the Deans and Development Officers panel. So we're going to have teams of deans and their development officers talk about their relationship and how they schedule their time and how they operate. That's such an important relationship. And of course, we'd love for you to get involved in the section. There's always something that needs to get done. And our newsletter that was just put out has all of our contact information, and we'd love just to chat with you. So thank you again all for being here. And I hope you have a great afternoon and a great October, which is generally very, very busy with events and homecomings and all that sort of thing. So thank you and have a great evening.